And welcome to the viewers and the people attending the City of Charlotte's budget workshops. We handle our council budget in a way that we have discussions prior to the manager making his final recommendation to discuss issues so that the manager has feedback from the council prior to the recommendations that he will make. So I want to just go ahead and recognize the council members that are in the space today. So those that are on virtual as well, then this meeting is being done consistent with the notifications required for virtual as well as an in-place meeting. And we're going to start with introductions around those that are participating in the session today. And we'll start with our Deputy City Clerk, and then we'll go to the folks that are the council members that are virtual.
Billy Tons, Deputy City Clerk.
Patrick Baker, City Attorney.
Renee Askew, Chief Information Officer.
Braxton Winston at large.
Mayor Pro Tem Julie Eiselt, and serving at large.
I'm Vi Lyles, and I serve as mayor.
Marcus Jones, City Manager.
Ed Driggs, District 7.
Teresa Smith, CFO.
Ryan Bergman, Budget Director.
Brent Cagle, Assistant City Manager.
And now those that are the council members attending virtually for introductions, please.
Good afternoon, Dimple Ashmara.
Greg Phipps at large.
Larkin Eggleston, District 1.
Ms. Johnson? You're on, we couldn't hear you. I don't know if your mute is on or just the volume is low. Ms. Johnson?
Renee Johnson, District 4.
All right. So others may join us as the workshop begins. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the chair of our Budget and Governance Committee, Mr. Driggs.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So the Budget and Governance Committee met on March 7th, basically to preview the presentations we're going to hear today. The topic of conversation is our enterprise funds. And in case anybody watching isn't clear, the city's enterprise funds are activities that are conducted as separate businesses away from our general fund. So our general fund, your property taxes and sales taxes, pay for police and fire and trash and other activities. But the airport, CATS, stormwater, and water operate as standalone businesses based on revenues they receive from their activity. So today we're going to hear budget presentations related to those 4 separate businesses. And with that, Madam Mayor, I will hand over to the next presenter.
All right, Mr. Jones, why don't you start?
Okay. Well, thank you, Mayor and members of Council. I'd like to start off by thanking the Budget and Governance Committee Chair, Mr. Driggs. I think what we have seen is having these previews at your committee and getting feedback has allowed us to have workshops that are smoother. Let's hopefully we don't break that today. really appreciate that. So today we really have 3 segments, if you will. One is the digital transformation. Our CIO, Renee Askew, she enjoyed being with you so much Monday night that she came back for round 2 today on Wednesday. And then typically we have these conversations around our enterprise funds, as Mr. Driggs has mentioned. So we'll have Charlotte Water, CATS, and Aviation. And then finally, we'll end up with financial partners, and Marie Harris will provide that presentation. I will say that typically there's a question about are things better or worse in terms of the budget since the last time we were together. I'd like to commend the team, especially our CFO and our budget director, to get the, as Ryan said last time, not the gap, but the challenge a bit smaller. So we're still dealing with about a $3 million challenge, but we feel confident that we will be able to close that and we'll be able to support the priorities of this council, especially what we're doing around compensation for our employees. So with that said, Mayor, I would like to turn it over to Ryan if there's anything he'd like to add before we get Renee up. Okay, we'll go straight to you then, Renee.
Good afternoon. Again, I'm Renee Askew, Chief Information Officer for the City of Charlotte. Joining me today, I have Deputy Director Brad Dunkel and also Deputy Director Markel Storey. Today, I'd like to share the city's vision for transformation. digital transformation. I'd also like to spotlight the work that we've done and the target we have around enterprise resource planning, which I'll give you a little bit more information about what that is as we proceed. Next slide, please. So primarily, as I highlight the journey that we've taken past and present and what I want to focus on, which is the city's digital transformation journey, I think it's important that we cover a couple of key areas. I want to focus on INT, information technologies, innovation areas, overview of the services that we provide you here at the city. I want to talk a little bit about our digital journey. So just foundationally, where we've been, where we'd like to go, and then I'd like to lastly focus on our enterprise resource planning, which is really the city's way of identifying a solution to support our back office administration. And we use nomenclature like ERP to define it. Next slide. So the INT department has many, many services, and I believe that what we typically are familiar with are those related to data, analytics, dashboards, reporting, but there's a lot more that the city is involved in. As you can see, remember from Monday, we talked about digital inclusion, public Wi-Fi, and Wi-Fi to our residents. So that's one of those services. But we also have a lot broader services that we provide. You've seen and talked about our mobile application at different times and supporting that. But we also support our CAD system, which is our computer-aided dispatch system that supports public safety. We're also responsible for things like payroll and transit systems and technology. So there's a sundry of things that we do that many of you may not recognize on a regular basis. But let's not forget cybersecurity. We're responsible for detecting, protecting, and defending the city against cyber threats. And so those are a few of the many things that we do as your technology organization. But these are just foundations for the building block of where we'd like to go next. Next slide, please. So as we look at the digital transformation journey, our journey started a long time ago. It started prior to the pandemic, where a number of organizations during the pandemic were putting a lot of things in place. We were fortunate enough to have those already in place. But our journey started, primarily with, various transformational activities around consolidation and centralization, sustainability of our workforce, and then we'll talk in a little bit about where we'd like to go. Next slide, please. So let's start with the foundation. And so back in 2019, we began what's called the centralization of technology services across the city. And at the time, it was a great way for us to better manage our assets, better manage our resources, and then ultimately manage our costs and better secure the city. What we didn't realize at the time is that was going to be the foundation by which we were able to activate our teams very quickly to support the city during the pandemic. And so that was foundational. And so we were able to quickly utilize our resources to wherever they were needed throughout the city to support that effort, and also stabilize our back office. So we've stabilized our back office with respect to putting in technology and tools that were used during the last 2 years and are continued to be used today. Next slide, please. So when we think about the transformation and what it really takes to do what we need to do, we have to have a map. We have to have a plan. And so in order to get that plan, over the last 3 months, we've spent some time talking with every department to understand what their visions were for their departments with respect to technology, what some of those plans were, and how we can help to support them. And so with the 21 departments, we spoke to over 120 employees, and I think it was a great exercise for us to get a lens into where the departments would like to go. And so some of those initiatives were items that we know are already planned and funded, and others we're anticipating will do so over the next coming years. But this roadmap that I'm about to describe really just serves as a bridge from the present to the future. So let me give you a few examples of some of those projects that were surfaced during our road mapping exercise. We talked about automating meter reading systems and replacing the one that we have in place. And so this advanced system will allow us to better monitor and report the meter reading and also have the systems call home more frequently. We also looked at what is it going to take to update our web portal for our water systems and be able to monitor that and be able to have mobile capabilities in place that don't exist today. We also discussed our criminal case management system. We do have one in place today. Typically, what we inform our residents on is when a case is started and when a case ends. We'd like to expand that by communicating intermittently throughout the process so that the resident understands what's going on with their particular case. Others is, we have multiple mobile applications, and we talked a little bit about CLT Plus, but we have multiple transit applications. So our vision as a city is how do we consolidate that into a one mobile application that the city, the residents can utilize and won't have to have multiple that represents the services that we provide. And lastly, our enterprise resource planning system. And so I will dig deeper into that as we go forward. But as you can see, we have some long-range plans on where the city would like to go in terms of how we provide better services for our residents. And so those are some of the things that I just mentioned. But as we move forward to the next slide, I'd like to take a deeper dive into enterprise resource planning. Okay, so what is an ERP digital transformation? It is the process of standardizing our core systems and those that run our back office services. So we're talking finance, we're talking procurement, budget, human resources, and even construction project management. And so what we're looking for as we start to transform how we run our back office is looking for a system that can help us do that more effectively. So what we have in front of you is really an overview of what some of those goals are around our enterprise resource planning system. And it is really an investment in our well-managed government priority. So we want to manage our business well, we want to be more efficient, we want to be more focused, and having a system that better enables us to do that is top of mind. So why now? So if you think about, 20, 30 years ago, we had a system that we had for years. And then 10 years ago, we went forward and we implemented our Munis system, which handles our financials and our procurement services. And so here we are now asking for another investment, potentially in an ERP system. And so why are we doing it now? Technology has evolved rapidly. And so what we have today is no longer sufficient and no longer meeting the needs of the city. And so what we're looking at is replacing some of our more antiquated systems and those systems that have reached end of life. And so when we think about and listen to the voice of those customers we spoke to, 81% of our departments felt our current systems were poor or maybe fair at best. And so we're not meeting the needs. We're not getting the services that they want to be able to provide you the information you need. So let's look at an example from procurement. So in the requirements that procurement has around a new system, they want improved functionality. They want robust automation and ability to streamline their operations. Effectively, they want to centralize some controls and governance so that there's greater accountability and compliance in the procurement space. Around business inclusion, they want to focus on increased transparency in order to drive inclusion across our city, providing a fair opportunity for all who want to bid on services. Additionally, we'd like to enhance the opportunities to measure the city's economic impact on the community through the services that we provide with our prime and with our subcontractors. And these are some of the services that we cannot easily provide and demonstrate the value through our current systems. Not to mention, what we are looking at is what we call a SaaS, software as a service. Rather than buying this big system, putting it in place, and then coming back 10 years from now looking for improvements, moving to a new model where the vendor maintains those systems, and every year we can get new features and new improvements so that we can expand and continue to evolve our business without having to go through another major ERP project. So that's ideally what we're looking for. And so when you talk about value, automation is key. Reporting, which is decision support, is a game changer when you have the information and the intelligence to make the right decisions for our business. And then implementing systems that are secure. So security continues to be top of mind, an area that we will continue having a high level of focus. Next slide, please. So from a timeline perspective and costs, we are very early in the process. We have not gotten in front of council. We have not made any final decisions. We are in the process of evaluating what's out in the marketplace. So we do have an RFQ that's on the street. Procurement did a wonderful job helping us get that out, and it was posted on March 30th. And we're looking at large-scale enterprise systems that can support the needs of this city. And so we're doing our advanced planning. And so the advanced planning looks like, what are the processes that we have in place today? Is there a way for us to be more efficient? Let's walk through, let's talk about our processes, let's look at how we improve them and use best practice approaches to doing things. So we're doing that. We're also planning to look at, as we go through the selection process, who best meets our needs for the best price, right? We're not looking for cheap. We're looking for a system that will meet the city's needs. That's most important. And we're going to manage that project through completion. We're going to start with data and reporting and what these needs are up front, rather than wait till the end. And we're going to determine and evaluate what value we're going to get from the system as we go along. So what we're estimating is approximately $7 to $10 million investment in FY2023. And we're looking at additional investments projected to $30 to $45 million over the next 3 years. So our enterprise funds, thank you, enterprise departments, help us with contributing approximately 38% of the project cost, so that general fund is not bearing the entire burden of the project. Next slide, please. So as I circle back to kind of summarize what we've done and how we've gotten here, we've actually taken a step to do an analysis. It's called a strategic business technology roadmap. We spent several months going through the exercise, and we came back to you with a solution that said, these are things we'd like to do, and one of the key drivers for transformation and change and workforce mobility is a new ERP system. So we anticipate, if we have the permission to continue moving forward, we're targeting a final selection of a vendor in October, and we'll probably have boots on the ground to start the initiative after contract negotiations are completed around January, February of next year. The project is going to take us 36 to 42 months, so it's not a short project, but we're going to be deliberate, we're going to be specific, and we're going to focus on the right things. And then again, I wanted to emphasize the investments needed for this effort. Questions?
Question for Ms. Askew. Mr. Driggs.
I think this is very important and necessary, so I appreciate what you've done.
You're good. You're good. They just turned it on for you.
Oh, thank you. It's also a huge and possibly disruptive undertaking, so I do appreciate the advanced work you're doing. I was wondering, for one, are we currently in a situation where we have a bunch of different platforms? And so is there going to be a platform integration process? Do we have to do data conversions and things like that?
Yes, sir, we do. Yeah, we currently have a number of disparate systems that the new ERP system will replace, and we'll have one consolidated system. There will definitely require us to do data conversion as well as, data archiving. We have a lot of data that we retain, and so we will still have access to it, but it won't necessarily be sitting in the new ERP system, but accessible to us for reporting and analytics.
So would that also affect the systems we use in planning, for example? Right now we have a situation with the county where we're on different platforms.
We have not included Acela, which is the platform that's used for planning, in scope for this.
Right.
That would be a separate conversation that we would have, because that's one of those systems that, as you recall, we talked about finance, budget, procurement, and human resources. Those are the targeted services, as well as construction project management, and Acela is not one of those systems.
Anyway, I think this is an area where we need to invest. Have you been able to estimate whether there are any cost savings that we can look forward to offset the outlays?
We have looked at it some, and so what we've looked at primarily is where are we funding individual systems and how we can collapse those costs to cover the cost post-implementation. And so what we anticipate, and this, again, we're still in the early stages, so I can't say that nothing will change, but what we anticipate is the cost that we're spending in the various software products will offset the cost of sustaining this one.
So again, I appreciate the work you're doing. I think this is something we have to do. Thank you for that.
All right, Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Renee, thank you. Mr. Driggs asked my question about the platforms, but can you talk a little bit about who you're talking to do this work?
So last year, in 2021, we did an RFI, and we had several vendors respond to the RFI. We narrowed that down to 4 vendors, and we have a committee of a project team representing all the various functions I mentioned, and we've narrowed it down to 3, and it's Oracle, SAP, and Workday. And so it's public knowledge because there's an RFQ out on the street, and that RFQ is to identify who would help with implementing. So what is the cost of the solution based on our requirements, and then who would be the proposed vendor to implement the software.
Okay, thank you. No, it's important work and critical work, especially in this era of cyber attacks and whatnot, so thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Winston?
Thank you. On slide 6, you mentioned, I don't know if it's necessarily relevant on the slide, but you mentioned improving service around criminal caseloads and contacting. I wonder, Mr. Bakari and I, really early in this term, were able to meet with the district attorney to talk about some intergovernmental stuff. And one of the things we really learned about was managing those caseloads over time can be kind of capricious because of the way state law is, and the need to keep physical records and not digital records. Is this kind of, are we looking at that system as part of the ERP digital transformation? And if so, or if not, if we're looking at it through a different process, are there opportunities to work with the district attorney to find around kind of comprehensive digitizing of data and caseloads so that we can provide better services there?
Great question. So the criminal case automation and communication is not in the ERP. It's part of a system that's called, I believe that's KB COPS. And so what we're doing with KB COPS is expanding the capabilities. I can find out if part of that project is to digitize some of the paper documents for, greater collaboration with other entities, and I can find that out.
Yeah, excuse me, I don't want to speak for Ms. Bakari, but, in the same kind of DNA of wanting to make investments, on the front end that are most effective and efficient, I think we should look at that because I think what we learned is there are certain parts of the process that if we don't fix those, we can drop as much money into trying to do things, and it won't generate the results that we want. So I want us to be conscious of that, specifically around managing criminal caseloads.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Ms. Ajmira?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Renee, thank you so much for this presentation. I appreciated your leadership in investing in our infrastructure when it comes to information technology. As a former employee who worked in transformation and roadmap projects like this, I certainly understand the importance of keeping up to try to stay competitive, especially in this age that we live in. Transformation is long overdue for many of our city services. So I'm in full support of this initiatives. And I know this might come as part of our planning process, but how far have we gotten to in terms of our budgeting for some of this? Because I can understand that costs will evolve over time as we learn more about the scope. and how many systems that needs to be part of this transformation. So from the capital budgeting perspective, how far have we gotten to a point where we can say, you know, this is a pretty good number that we should budget for?
Councilmember Ajmira, this is Ryan. I'll take that one. We're not very far along as far as a total cost. Renee provided a range for us. So I'll just use a number from that range. If it was 40 million, for instance, that is a number over multiple years, and it's a number that's the general fund and it's the enterprise funds. So from a standpoint of how it would work in this year's budget, for instance, the way it would probably be structured is because it's a big capital expense, but it's not something we would take debt on, we would try to utilize our PAYGO funds over multiple years to try to move forward on it. We already have about $10 million over 5 years in our PAYGO schedule for ERP investments like this. So of course that would have to go higher, but we're not starting at zero. So we would try to structure a concept in this year's budget that would, of course, need to change prior to next year's budget based on actual results, the RFQ, and things like that. But we didn't want to get ahead of council on this, so that's as far as we are along.
I understand. And are these all cloud-based solutions that we are looking at?
Yes, we're only looking at cloud-based solutions.
Okay. And any idea on what kind of additional resources we ought to be looking at to support some of this transformation initiatives that we are looking at?
So our first order of business is we're working on a staffing plan that looks at what would the future needs be based upon a cloud software solution. And our goal would be to upskill and reskill our existing resources. And so at this time, we don't anticipate needing additional resources. So as we experience attrition, what we're doing is looking for, we're holding those positions, and once we have a new system selected, we're going to target hiring people with that skill. So, but those who are currently with the city that don't have the skill, we're planning on upskilling and training those resources so they're better equipped to support the new product. But as people leave the organization, we're going to look for specific skills so we don't have to come back and say we need new headcount. But that's where I am right now based upon what we know.
So, Renee, I just want to make sure that we're fully answering the question. So within whatever this number is, you will need, this number covers the resources that you will need to implement. To implement. In that process, because I've been through a few of these and they're messy, you'll have to make a decision whether to bring on additional resources to establish this or backfill positions as people have to leave their day job to be assigned to this. Did I get that right?
That is correct, but that would also be considered part of the project cost. Yeah, agreed.
Okay, so Mr. Jones, I think you nailed it. So part of the implementation, but then also once the implementation is completed, a lot of the systems are live. Obviously, there will be an ongoing support that might, and I don't know what the resource capacity is like and what it would be required. I would be interested in how that request would come in as part of our general fund a couple of years down the road once this implementation has gone live.
Yeah, and I think that's a great question. As part of the RFQ as well, we have asked the vendors to propose a period of time for post-deployment support. So recognizing the fact that our internal resources will have to come up to speed, we are anticipating as part of the project to have resources stay with the city to help us get acclimated and further equipped to be able to support it on our own. But we're planning to build in some time for that as well.
Okay, great. So that 38%, the number was presented that's coming out of our enterprise funds. So is that the number even post go live or ongoing support? Or that number would change or depend on how well the implementation goes?
Councilmember Ajmira, that number is for the implementation of this project. It gets quite a bit more complicated than that beyond. Basically, we have a cost allocation plan where each year we calculate what percentage enterprise funds should pay of things like IT, HR, and finance. So that number will certainly change a little bit over the years.
All right. Well, thank you.
Mr. Bakari?
Thanks. Let me start by giving some, like a bit of reality context to all of our colleagues and the public. This is probably one of the most painful and feared things on the entire planet. And Renee, you've done a really good job of articulating it with confidence and everything. There's a reason why organizations and banks with their core systems and others don't do this. It's because they're so scared, and they know when you stand up as a CIO doing this, you're literally putting your job on the line. It is a moment, and by moment, I mean a 3 to 5 year moment of pain, of fear, and of ultimately people, many more people lose their jobs than don't through this process. So the fact that you have gotten yourself to this point now, I think deserves a show of respect from all of us that you're here. The easier thing would have been when 4 or 5 years ago when I brought up on the first month of the job here, we still have data centers that we're managing buried over here on these old systems, and it was, this is the way it must be, right? So the easy path is the other route, and so that's your first kudos. But I think that you have such a fundamental part of providing autonomy and air cover, and you have such a fundamental part of scoping out, more than you need, more time, more resources and funding, more capabilities, because usually people don't get over that first hurdle of saying, all right, we're going to do what we need to do. And this is why a lot of organizations failed. But then the second level that I see is when they get in there, they're like, okay, we're just going to cut a big check and we're going to pick a vendor, and it becomes an implementation, and it's really more of a conversion. It's like, here's the old stuff, and we're going to painfully get it into the new systems and the new data taxonomies and things like that. When in reality, the big opportunity is level 3, which is transformation. It's taking everything and reimagining it. And this is, so many people fail at this all over the board, because it's not about we have systems that don't talk to each other. It's about re-envisioning the entire process from end to end. It's about saying, well, why can't someone who's a CATS user use the same app to instantaneously pay for something in parking or a ticket? And somebody in Charlotte Water can pay their bill and understand in real time what's happening. Somebody, from a stormwater perspective, can see updates on what's going on with their drains and things. And this is where it goes, and I guess the final point I want to say, because this was about the icebreaker of saying these words out loud. I get it, right? Now the details start. I really think that as we look at the entire universe of this, we have to start with the outcomes, with the user personas, with what we're going to achieve. And we should start with visions of, from a data front, like we should use all of our assets, we've been saying it forever, and scan all of our roads every single day with imagery that comes in and fuels all kinds of different departments' knowledge, from congestion to potholes to, so it takes, you have to, if you start only with the vision of integrating 75 disparate systems into one ERP, then you've cut out the ability to find all kinds of cost savings and additional benefits gained. So I really look forward to that. We don't need to go into the weeds of it now, other than I hope everyone really recognizes that this is going to be probably the most massive undertaking. I can't wait to see our cloud strategy and how we're going to transition from what we've got to where we need to go and all of those things. But I think most importantly, it's about setting our CIO up for success. So when stuff starts getting rocky, when the employees start complaining about the system this, and I don't like the new system, and oh, it's been down for a week, and all these things, we expect it, we know it, and we know when we're on or off track. and this group doesn't start responding to things they don't understand off the cuff. So that's the setup for success. Renee, you've impressed me a great deal in the short amount of time you're here, and now you're undertaking one of the most challenging things on the planet. So best of luck. And
No pressure at all.
can't wait.
So Renee, if you want to change your mind, it's not too late.
I would just like to add to, thank you, Mr. Bakari. There are two things that city managers don't do. That is build a new city hall and institute an ERP system, because they are messy. So I appreciate it, and you're correct. I've had a couple of these under my belt, and it's how you frame it at the beginning. And I'm actually doing this to support Renee, because many of the people that are behind her right now will be impacted in a way that they never imagined. So appreciate what you're doing, and appreciate the comment.
Do we have any other questions from anyone online?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mr. Phipps.
Has this process been delayed or pushed back in any way from its original scoping? It seems like we probably, I mean, this is something that's it seems like to me it's been long overdue. So has this project been delayed in any way?
No, it hasn't been delayed at all. In fact, when I joined in 2019, the first thing I started looking at was the total cost of ownership. What is it really costing us to run some of these systems that we have? And so it's not enough to say that, okay, this costs more than the other. It's also about making sure the organization was ready and that the time was now. And I think that, working with the departments and gaining the confidence from the departments and city leadership, I feel comfortable that now is a great time to move forward. You also think about the transformation that the country's gone through in the last 2 years. I think we're poised where people are okay with change. And so that's why we felt like this was the best time to start. So no, it's not delayed at all.
Thank you.
I do have one more question. I think Mr. Bakari can talk circles around me for sure on the IT stuff, and you can as well. But when it comes to the vision for our departments to improve city business and resident services, in all of the different areas, we read so much about the data capabilities that cities are using for, whether it's water or transportation or garbage collection or whatever. Is there and this, I don't know if this is for you or for the manager, but is there also a plan to, talk with departments about what they could be doing, what more they could be doing with regards to smart technology? Because from what you're saying, you're going to work with a vendor that's going to be able to do the add-ons throughout the year instead of having to buy a whole new package, and that's great. But what's in terms of the culture, I guess I should say, the city culture around using better data for outcomes? What's the plan for that?
I'll take the first shot.
Data collection.
Yeah, so, real time, forgive me, team, there's a request I have for employees and by different segments, and it's taking a bit of time. We'll get there. So just for us to be more efficient as we design this, it's going to help us better utilize data. So that's from a high perspective, from a technical perspective and a high perspective.
And from a technical perspective, the departments as well as our data team have been involved from the beginning, because I believe that you don't start thinking about those things after the system is in place. You think about them as you're building it to make sure that you have the outcomes that you're looking for. And so our departments are involved. We have what we call project teams, and so those are the individuals that do the work every day and know where the gaps are in the systems that services they need. And so some of the examples that I gave you from procurement came directly from the procurement, Kay Elmore, who is the Chief Procurement Officer. So she's looking forward to being able to pull more information from the system, and her requests and requirements are already part of that. So it starts with, from the beginning, making sure that we have the right people understanding what those needs are, so the outcome could be better data. And I think that's going to be the approach, is make sure we have the right people involved at front.
Okay, thank you. That was the last question, Madam Mayor.
Okay, I think I just want to second and emphasize the appreciation that we have. I've been on a board that had to do this and have seen the toll that it can take on a team like yours. And so we are really grateful to have the explanation at the beginning. And at the end of it, we hope to see you still smiling and feeling good about what we are accomplishing, because it does make a difference in the organization that had the opportunity to see this process. At the end of the day, the consumer was the winner. And that was really the important part of it. But it was not without a few bumps and starts and tears and probably a little bit more. So thank you very much. Any other comment? If not, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Bergman.
Sure, and so now we'll go into our enterprise fund portion. We'll start with water and stormwater. So we'll have Mike Davis and Angela Charles come up.
All right, who's going to start us off, Ms. Charles or Mr. Davis?
Yes, I am. Good afternoon, Mayor Lyles, Council, and Manager. I am Angela Charles, Director of Charlotte Water, and, you know, Renee introduced her deputy, so I can't let Renee outdo me. So Jackie Gerald, David Zayers, Sean Kaufman, Ron Hargrove, and, of course, Mike Davis represent the greater Charlotte Water team, so I just wanted to do that. Thank you for the opportunity to present this afternoon. Stormwater, water, and wastewater are working together under a one water philosophy for our community and region. So today we're going to present the budget outlook for both enterprise funds. And so we're going to begin with Mike.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm going to try to keep the goodwill alive in this presentation. This is a brief presentation. I'm privileged to be before you, just give you an update on your stormwater services program. I've got, I believe it's 6 slides. I'm going to use that to tell you kind of 3 things, just kind of a reminder of what our program does, get into sort of the 4 big strategic drivers that act on our budget, and then kind of tell you at the end a little bit about how that sort of forecasts for where we're going. So just a sort of perfunctory reminder about what it is your stormwater services program does. We sometimes just kind of break it down into terms of quantity and quality, and so you can think about this as flood mitigation, keeping in particular streets and roadways clear of flooding, but it's also about water quality and ensuring that when surface runoff reaches our streams, that's done in the cleanest way possible. And thirdly, that we think about everything we do through the lens of equity. I would say that's an increasingly important part of the service we provide. So that worked a minute ago. There we go. So the first of the 4 big drivers I want to talk to you about can all be kind of termed infrastructure. The first piece of it that I'm going to talk about is sort of in the upper left, thinking about major capital projects. It's something we don't talk a lot about in front of council necessarily, but it does command a lot of our capital investment. These are our big sort of neighborhood scale projects. They're comprehensive in nature, meant to replace, you know, in some cases, old clay pipes that have deteriorated or things that are just undersized. Big part of our budget and largely goes unnoticed, but it's just worth reminding you it's a big part of what we do. What we have talked a lot about and wanted to give you what I think is a positive update is the minor repair program. And many of you will remember that kind of around the 2019, FY2019 timeframe was a period in which we were really wrestling with how to get the stormwater services program calibrated in a way that it could make good on its commitments to the public. At that time, we had a backlog that it was pretty common for us to tell people at that time that when they called us, let us know about an issue, that they'd have to wait 7 years or more for us to even sort of go deep into an investigation to resolve it. So we made a lot of changes going into FY 2020. Some of that was about changing what we qualify for work. Some of it was about rethinking how we approach our priorities. And a lot of it was about increasing our level of resource commitment. And I want to thank Council for your support of that. But the target was to take that backlog, which at the end of that fiscal year was predicted to be around 1,690 projects, and see if we could retire that list in 5 years. So what you're seeing then on the right is kind of where we are at maybe slightly past a midway point into that 5-year surge. We're down to about 400, what I'll call unassigned projects, down from that 1690, and the expectation would be that at the end of those 5 years, those will all be assigned and underway in some fashion. To be clear, that doesn't mean every project is complete, but it's at least at a place where we've engaged with residents in a way they're seeing progress, whether it needs easements from them or some other sort of utility relocation, et cetera. So that's the good news on the minor repair side. And I did want to just kind of forecast a little bit of clouds on the horizon, and that is that any of us who have been doing work that involve significant construction have seen some issues emerging around construction materials availability. That has not hurt us directly yet, but I do think it stands as a threat for both schedule and costs going forward. And I would say that was true even before we got to conflict in Europe that is further impacting certain types of materials that are important to us. All right, so the second of the 4 drivers that I'll talk about is where we're going as a program. So that last slide I just showed you shows a chart that's going down over time, and you might ask, well, what happens when that backlog is retired? And the answer is we'll still have a lot of work to do. We maintain a big system, and it's going to need perpetual maintenance, and the goal would be how can we get to a place where we're in a steady state and can really take care of those assets. Where we've been over the last several years is developing a pretty young asset management program, but the idea is you have to know where your stuff is, then you need to know what condition it's in, and then you have to be able to make smart investments in those assets so that you can extend the life of those assets. So that chart in the upper right is kind of theoretical, but it's just the idea that as you move along in the service life of an asset, you can make less expensive interventions that can prolong the life, and it's a smarter, more financially responsible way to take care of those assets. And the lower right, I will just point out as a bit of a broad benchmark that if you think about an asset as having a 100-year life, then you'd want to basically be able to replace 1% of your system per year. We're not there. We're at about 0.5%. That number has been growing over time, and I really think that as we are able to get out of this business of doing reactive minor repair program stuff that I just described and get more into asset management-based approach, we'll be able to see those same resources redeployed in a way that should really allow us to make progress. But if you were to ask what's it going to take to get to the full 1%, that's something we're going to have to learn, frankly, over the next couple of years as we're continuing to retire that backlog. The third driver that I'll talk to you about is our surface water quality program. And what I'd want to tell you is you should feel very good that you have a great surface water quality program in your stormwater services group. And this year we expect to be audited by NCDEQ. That is happening to everyone around the state who is a holder of the kind of permit that we have with the state. And so our time has come, and actually we just found out a couple days ago that clock has started for us. They've just formally commenced that process, and what I expect we'll find is that we're running a great program. We'll be excited to bring forward to you the results of that. I'm sure they'll find things that we can do better, but you have a great program, and we'd expect the audit to confirm that. And the last of the 4 that I want to talk about is just growth pressure. It really has been unrelenting, and we feel great that we've been able to provide service to development industry, which supports the city's overall goals for economic development. We are behind that, but it is also true that as the city grows, it introduces more paved surfaces that create more runoff, and it stresses our system. And so what we're always trying to do, at least through a budget perspective, is how do we provide great service that is at a low cost while we also are ensuring that we're reviewing for the kinds of things that make a difference. And so as it relates to our current array of ordinances and permit review things, we're really just trying to stay calibrated to make sure we've got resources without increasing cost. And this budget reflects that. And then also of note, the UDO, as you've heard me say before, is really a strategic frontier for us. There are things we need to fix because the way Charlotte is growing is different than the way our ordinances were written for decades ago. So we're eager to see that kind of get over the finish line and help us all from a drainage perspective at least. And so the last thing is just to talk about how does that all come together in terms of the FY 2023 budget. On the right is really kind of kind of a snapshot of the financial planning, kind of what we've thought we would do and kind of how we've tracked against that. And I'll just remind folks in terms of these bullets on the left, the revenue that we get does come on the basis of how much impervious surface property owners have. They pay that monthly on their bill. And what we do is kind of use those revenue assumptions against a bunch of other assumptions that we work with strategy and budget and finance and ultimately a consultant that will conduct a review on that in order to kind of constantly model and remodel. So where we've been kind of going back to that FY 2020, that was really, again, the start of that 5-year surge. You can kind of see in the middle column what the expectation was versus what the actuals have been on the right. And I would just say that, as we would always do at this time of year, would just say that the final recommended budget proposal would come forward when the manager presents to you the total budget. And I would just say, as not to create any real suspense around that, we would expect to be very close to that model. And with that, I'll happily take any questions you have.
All right, Mr. Winston?
Two questions. Are there any proposed or pending stormwater changes at the state level that could or would impact our financial planning?
There are none that I'm aware of currently. No.
Secondly, so we've all learned a lot as an organization of kind of recalibrating with COVID. But as you mentioned, there were pending challenges with supply to goods even before the conflict in Eastern Europe, but that is upon us right now. Are there other types of kind of commodity-light recalibrations that we can do or consider, to kind of stay on our goals should those kind of impacts become more material?
Yes and no. I mean, at the end of the day, we build using materials that are meant to be durable, and there's only so much we can do to sort of really work upstream, to overcome some of those pressures. But we do talk to contractors to try to understand where they have pain points, and that has us working kind of earlier in our design process to rethink how we do certain parts of our design, so that when those contractors go to bid, they aren't having to maybe deal with challenges in the same way. So it's really just paying attention to what contractors can and can't have ready-made access to.
The only thing I would add is that from an internal standpoint, we have had to look at some of the materials that we purchase. And in one area, we've had to experiment with using a different pipe type in order to address the material shortages that we're seeing.
Thank you. And that's less of a budgetary, that's more of an internal kind of policy issue. Right. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Driggs?
Thank you, Mayor. I think we should acknowledge the slide that we just saw about that backlog of service delivery, because people may not remember, we were looking at a really bad situation. I was estimating, based on the per project typical cost, that it was $1 billion or something. And we looked also at some graphs that showed at different rates of increase how long it might take. So we've stayed within this framework for rate increases. We haven't had to go to some of those more extreme scenarios, and we've got it under control. So I just want to really emphasize that's an incredible relief for me and a great service to the city. I have a question about your comment on the UDO. The UDO is kind of currently in negotiation, and we are on several levels identifying kind of conflicts or issues that need to be worked out in order to have a coherent system. Can you tell us any more about what, from a stormwater perspective, is still unresolved?
Well, first of all, thank you for those comments. And I should have said when I was first talking about this that the reason we're able to do any of that is because we got about 200 people who've really busted their tails over the last few years getting that work done. So thank you to them as well. About the UDO and kind of where we stand with outstanding comments, by and large, so I'd first say that we have significant things that are baked into the UDO. Without getting way into the details today, what I would say is fundamentally the biggest thing we're trying to do is deal with smaller scale infill development. What we used to be able to do very well and served us well was big subdivisions come in, big mixed-use projects come in. Our ordinances would catch that. What we've been missing in the last few years is when individual lots turn over and introduce a lot of impervious surface and flood downstream properties as one example. So I think it's meaningful that we are introducing things that will allow us to catch that. And to your question, there have been some concern about how to get that calibrated right. So how far do we go in looking at every little thing that someone wants to do? Like, at what point do you have diminishing returns on that? So I would say that's probably the area we're spending the most time is how fine of a net do you make for that? There are plenty of other little details, but that's the one that stands out.
Thank you. Well, I look forward to hearing how you work that out, because again, that's going to be one of the few things that we need to get in line for it all to work. But thank you. And to all of your people, by the way, I didn't mean to exclude them.
Not at all. Thank you.
Mr. Phipps?
Yes, I know Charlotte Water, I mean, it's a certain level of humility that they want to maintain, but I was wondering if you could share with the public and the rest of council, if they may not know, that I thought I read somewhere where Charlotte Water, Stormwater, or whatever was recognized nationally for its efforts in stormwater flood mitigation. Am I correct on that?
Mr. Phipps, thank you for that. Yes, on the advice of counsel, yes. No, I was just thinking, we do regularly win awards, and again, it is testament to the great work a lot of people do all the time. When I think back to the last award that we won, there's an organization called NAFSMA. That's just a few months ago. We won at a national level an award for best communications strategy. So depending on which one you may be thinking of, I don't recall, but I'll just take that as an opportunity to again thank you and thank others for their great work.
I know.
I was thinking about the one that was highlighted during a town hall on the emergency preparedness that was done this past November, that was highlighted, and I think it was worthy of recognition that you all received such a prestigious award.
So they get so many of those that they can't remember them all. So he's going to take that one, Mr. Phipps. Mr. Driggs asked the question about the UDO, and I wanted to make sure that there was an open opportunity to have that discussion within the development community, within our own, purview. And on the calibration and the pace of development, you talked about the infill, but I wondered how we were doing as well, as you would say, with the major developments that we are approving for places like the Innovation District, the River District. How are those looking in terms of how we are going to get that accomplished, as well as work them into the system for maintenance and repairs?
So thank you for that question. When we think about larger developments, and I'm going to tie this back to Councilmember Winston's question from a moment ago, everyone needs to understand that our world changed in 2018 when every city's ability to apply regulations to redevelopment was taken away. And so what that has meant is there are some big tracts of land that have a lot of built-upon area today that before 2018, when they would redevelop, we would be able to have stormwater devices and interventions and things that reduce flooding, improve surface water quality, and we can't do that anymore. And so until that provision is restored, we have a hole in our process. And when I say until, I don't know that it ever will, but we hope that one day would change. And so with the UDO, we're going to be able to catch, hopefully, a lot of things that we've missed really at a smaller scale. And a larger scale, we're great at dealing with new impervious surface. And until something changes at the state legislative level, we're never going to be able to mitigate through redevelopment things that contribute a lot of runoff today. I don't know if that answered your question.
No,
but that's
you did.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Mr. Winston?
To that, I'd like to get smarter about that personally, so maybe that's something we can talk about offline. If this is something council should be considering as it relates to our state legislative agenda and the things that we need, especially if it's impacting budgets and our ability to plan for future growth, I think that's something, that I hope council as a whole might want to get smarter about, to kind of connect these two processes, the budget and our legislative agendas, together. So,
I second that.
thank you.
Thank you. If that's the last question, we can move on.
Okay, I'm going to talk about the Water and Wastewater Fund, and I'd like to recognize Chad Howell, our CFO, who's going to drive for me. Chad is my right hand and keeps me in check, and he's also the brain trust behind the financial model, so thank you, Chad. Okay, are we?
It's loading.
Oh, it's loading? Okay. Great. Again, Charlotte Water, our logo is One Water Strong, One Water referencing stormwater, water, and wastewater, working together under a single vision and direction in our community. The vision for Charlotte Water continues to be one of the leading utilities in the nation, recognized for excellence, dedicated to our people, this community, the region, and the environment. I want to take a moment to recognize the team during the pandemic. So, our team really had to operate and manage and maintain the water system through staff shortages, whether it was due to folks being out due to COVID or folks deciding to make a career change. The regulations and requirements of Charlotte Water did not change. And so in the midst of a pandemic, we were recognized nationally. Councilmember Phipps, every wastewater treatment plant in our utility received an award. This is a picture from last November from the National Association of Clean Water Agencies. And one of our plants, McAlpine, located in Pineville, 14 years straight of perfect permit compliance in wastewater. That is remarkable. The other thing we'd like to note about the pandemic, there was a lot of emphasis on washing your hands, and it really spoke to the intersection of providing clean, safe drinking water and public health. And so we distributed with perfect compliance. Perfect is a really strong word, 39.6 billion gallons of water to this community. And so, again, we want to recognize the team for the good work. In the corridors of opportunity, the One Water team, that Charlotte Water and Stormwater, invested over $200 million in areas associated with the corridors of opportunity. And I've said many times, this has got to be Mr. Jones's favorite slide out of the deck. But again, this represents the work that we are doing together as a greater One Water team. The proposed FY2023 budget is $534 million. Our budget requirements, of course, water and wastewater is heavily regulated, so increases in regulatory requirements. Of course, our community and region, Charlotte Water serves the whole county. We're a city-county agency. We also have connections to other counties. Increases in capacity and increases in rehab. We have to have funding to make sure that we have proper capacity in our system. And of course, we are seeing increases in fuel, energy, and chemical costs. The split is just about the same. When you really look at the Charlotte Water budget, only a third of it goes into operating the utility. 2/3 is really for capital expenditures in our community, and that's pretty much been the case for many, many years. Our proposed capital program is a 5-year, yeah, you may have to, there you go. It's a 5-year, $2.65 billion capital improvement program. This is the largest that we've had in the history of the utility. 50% of it is dedicated to capacity for growth. Now, capacity is related to regulatory requirements. So on some level, if you don't have the capacity in the water and wastewater system, it becomes a regulatory issue. And so the two are related. Also with rehab and replacement, there's a lot of emphasis federally on clean, safe drinking water and lead and copper in water systems and the evaluation that needs to be done. And so when you look at the buckets of our capital improvement program, we've got capacity for growth. We also have rehab and replacement of our existing and current system. And then, of course, what we just have to do is meet regulatory requirements. On the right-hand side of this graph here or chart here is something new for us. We want to quantify what is the economic impact of water in our community. We do believe that we are a silent economic driver in this community. And so we hired a consultant to come in and say what type of jobs are being created and what is the economic output. And so I'll just read a couple of these. 246,000 jobs were created in water-dependent industries in the 6-county region in 2021. In terms of economic output, $30.9 billion contributed to Mecklenburg County by water-dependent industries and $46.5 billion in the 6-county region. That is significant. So as we invest in our water system, as we complete projects, there is definitely an economic and regional impact to the work that water does in the community. In terms of financial planning, we do have a 10-year financial plan. We have a model, and so we will be recommending to the manager a range right now between 3.5 and 3.75. We're working with our budget folks and Teresa's folks in finance to firm that number up, but we do believe that the recommended increase this year will be within the plan or within the 10-year financial plan for the utility. Rate comparison, we always like to compare ourselves to other utilities in and outside of North Carolina. We are in the middle. Of course, each system is operated and managed differently, but we fare pretty well. Also, in the right-hand margin, we are ISO certified. Not many people know that water is very process-driven. So we have ISO certifications like private companies where we apply private practices to our operation. And so you see some of our ISO certifications there. And what it is really organizations from the outside looking at our processes and looking how we operate and manage the utility for us to remain competitive. And so we're very, very proud of those. And so this is my last slide. This is a picture from Hidden Valley Elementary School. And those are the kindergartners. And our One Water folks gave every kindergartner a coat and toys for Christmas. And this really represents what we are in the community. Water is our product, but service is our business. And so it requires investment in the community for us to be able to even serve these little ones here, and that's what water is all about. It's the foundation of the community today and in the future. And so I'll entertain any questions.
Charles, I love this picture, especially the little boy that really doesn't want to look at the camera.
I know.
He's so busy looking at the water drop, you know, in the back, like, am I going to get wet, I guess, or something like that.
Yeah.
So, any questions, though, for Ms. Charles? Mr. Driggs?
Thank you, Ms. Charles. If we could go back to slide 6, I think it is. So you have the categories, and I apologize if you did explain this, but what exactly do we spend money on under the categories of regulatory requirements committed to public projects and utility support? What kind of
Sure.
expenses are those?
Okay, regulatory requirements would be anything that we would have to do with upgrades. And so there are things there are limits, permit limits that we have to make by law or meet by law. So any expenditure that has to be done to meet a federal or state regulatory requirement. And most of that has to do with infrastructure upgrades. So maybe we need to treat water to a certain limit.
But that may be something we have to do because of a regulation, but it's also something that we should do, right?
That's exactly
This is not wasted money, just a cost of government.
That's right. You're exactly right, because you just don't want to meet the requirements. That is the bare minimum, but we do try to categorize what do you have to do regardless.
Right.
And so that's what that represents. Commitment to other public projects would be city projects. Let's say the city goes in and there's a neighborhood improvement project, or the state has a project, and we need to be a part of that so that we only maybe tear up the road one time.
Right.
Okay,
right.
so
Yeah.
that is collaboration, really collaboration with other agencies where the water and wastewater infrastructure is involved in part of that bigger project. Utility support would be facilities, systems. Renee talked previously about the meter reading system. We're looking at some good technology there where the users of water can have more information. That would be utility support.
Right. And can we talk in this meeting about the issue that you and I have discussed, the wastewater constraint that has caused us to have to defer certain petitions?
Yes,
I think
and
it's worth just bringing that out.
Yes, and there is, who has I have a slide that can be pulled up. Thank you, Councilmember Driggs. It says WASAC area. It is a map.
They're trying to bring it up.
It's going to take a minute to.
Okay, and I'll go ahead and talk through that.
Well,
It's less-
okay. Could we come back to that, because Mr. Phipps and Mr. Winston had a
The
comment
budget.
on what we're talking about first?
Sure,
And we can come
yeah.
back to
Sure,
that.
okay.
Then that gives Donata a few minutes, too. All right, so Mr. Phipps?
Thank you.
Hey, I had a general question. There's been some news reports that some entities have been testing, I guess, wastewater for COVID. Has your department been involved in that in any way?
Yes, we have, and we're part of the system, the state and national system that regulates and monitors wastewater for COVID. So yes, Charlotte is a part of that. Not really advertised, but we're part of that whole effort, and we were a part during the whole pandemic.
All right, Mr. Phipps, the answer is yes and yes. Anything else, Mr. Phipps?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Winston?
Yes. One pandemic impact that I was interested is the distribution of water in our water system. I like to imagine that changes in work, life, and school behavior do have disparate impacts on a system. You know, you have less brushing and flushing, for instance, in employment centers. With that capacity being transferred to neighborhoods and in residential zones. Many of those workers not coming into our service area may live in counties that may or may not be serviced by Charlotte Water, And I know that Charlotte Water is a very forward-looking shop. So while the future of work and play is unknown, has there been any kind of consideration in the future changes to the way our systems are engineered or invested in because of any presumed changes in growth patterns to where people are?
Yes, now I would say consumption was flat, even though we didn't have people coming to uptown Charlotte, we had people staying at home, right? And so people were still, and our folks were still using water. What we've done is, and this is the question, how have the usage patterns really impacted the utility? And right now, we really aren't seeing a significant impact in how the infrastructure works underground at this point. Okay, we know we are experiencing a lot of growth in our area, but in terms of pure usage and the infrastructure being able to handle going in a neighborhood versus going into a large building, we haven't really seen that big of a difference when you look at it at the 30,000-foot level. Now what's happening now is we are seeing more usage come back to the industrial, commercial types of facilities because the society is opening up.
Is there, you think, kind of an amount of time that we can look over and look back to see, hey, you know, are there things that we need to recalibrate?
Yes, well, what we've been doing is we've looked at previous trending, so that's why I can say really on some level the usage and consumption has pretty much been the same, but it's something that we will continue to monitor and to see if we're noting any changes that will require any improvements in infrastructure or change.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question.
Okay, I think Ms. Jackson has the map up. Are you okay? You got it?
Sure, I want the map itself. So Councilmember Driggs, what you see highlighted would be the areas that are impacted by the constriction that we have with WASAC. So Charlotte Water is a regional utility. Regional utilities have agreements with utilities not necessarily in the same county. And so why would we do that? There's a ridge line in Mecklenburg County, and so it was more economical for us to have a partnership with WASAC. WASAC is Water and Sewer Authority of Cabarrus County. It was more economical to have a partnership with WASAC to treat the sewer because, as you can see, the sewer flows downhill. Now, this represents less than 10% of our total service area, and majority of service areas aren't in the city of Charlotte proper. And so what happened is that when we do have an agreement, and right now our agreement is for 6 million gallons a day. The total, yes, our limit right now is 6 million gallons a day. Our agreement is 12. And so when we approached the other utility to increase our capacity, we found out from them that their treatment plant was near capacity. So we are a customer of WASAC, and so the ripple effect would be a slowing or pause of those few areas in Mecklenburg County because they're treated at WASAC and not within Mecklenburg County. Now, what are we doing about it on our side of the fence? And so what we're doing now is we're also looking at building a pump station in Mecklenburg County that will pump over the ridge to a treatment plant in Mecklenburg County to give us the resiliency and the redundancy that we'll need in the future. So long-term, because water has to think 30, 40 years down the road, long-term we'll have both. We'll have capacity, and there's already a interlocal agreement, okay, to the both council, this council, and their council has agreed upon. We'll have capacity in WASAC. We'll also have capacity in Mecklenburg County for redundancy to help eliminate this type of restriction in the future.
That makes
That's what we're doing. I know that was long, but
No,
you know.
I think
it's
it
a
makes
great
perfect sense. I mean, we had an agreement that somebody else would handle some of this for us. They ran out of capacity. We're currently negotiating with them on how the increase in their capacity will be funded. At the same time, we're looking at reducing our dependence on them, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so I appreciate all of that.
Yeah.
I think you know from some conversations I've had that people who want to develop in these areas and are facing delays are curious to understand how those permits are awarded or who
Right.
gets to go and who doesn't. So I think that's something that might be an area where we just look at outreach or communication and try to be clearer about
Yes.
how we make those decisions.
Yes.
But appreciate that and
Yes.
appreciate Charlotte Water. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you.
No further questions, then Mr. Jones, Mr. Bergman, where do we go next?
All right, so next we will go to our Charlotte area transit system. So Blanche Sherman, Deputy Director, will be in person, but John Lewis will also join us virtually. I want to thank him for his flexibility to have it today, even though he was scheduled to be out.
Thank you, Ryan. Can everyone hear me in the room?
Yes, we can hear you, Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Mayor, and good afternoon, Mayor Lyles, Manager Jones, and City Council members. Again, I'm John Lewis, Executive Director of the Charlotte Area Transit System, and as Ryan mentioned, in the room with you this afternoon is Blanche Sherman, the CAT's Chief Financial Officer. If we can go on to the next slide. I'm going to give you a quick look back at FY22 and the challenges and opportunities brought about by the pandemic and the change in daily commuting patterns that has impacted demand for public transit services. Our focus for FY23 will center on the implementation of the battery electric bus pilot program and continuing preliminary design and engineering for the Silver Line. Next slide. Significant loss of demand for public transit services due to quarantine, social distancing, and remote working resulted in an immediate and significant loss of ridership across all modes of CAT's service offerings. From the outset of the pandemic, CAT's immediately adjusted service levels to match demand. This also allowed us to implement initiatives to help protect our workforce by implementing on and off weeks and social distancing on board our buses and trains. Ridership continues to slowly increase year over year, however, until major businesses throughout the region return to some semblance of normalcy in regard to employees' return to workplace, our ridership numbers will continue to underperform. Now, that being said, I do believe that transit is well positioned for a ridership return. If we take a look at large event utilization of our service over the last several months, I think we get a glimpse of what the future will hold. Whether it's Panthers games, Hornets games, or Charlotte FC matches, when Charlotteans have a destination in the uptown area, they have consistently and reliably chosen to use the CAT's Blue and Gold Line rail services along with our bus services. As uptown businesses continue to open their doors for in-person workplace, I believe transit will follow. Each schedule change since the fourth quarter of 2020, we have incrementally increased service levels on bus as demand has begun to revive. Rail service levels have remained steady at 20-minute intervals during that period, but just last week, we adjusted Blue and Gold Line service levels to enable us to provide more frequent rail service during the day as some of the larger employers, like Wells Fargo and Bank of America, are reopening facilities for in-person work. Last week, as I mentioned, the Blue Line began running 15-minute intervals rather than 20 minutes, and we'll continue to monitor demand for our services and adjust service as necessary. In response to a tight labor market, CATS has been increasing its marketing and communications and outreach to fill open positions and generate renewed interest in public transit as a career. CATS has also paid retention bonuses to frontline operating employees and worked with RATP Dev, our private third-party bus contractor, to ensure their employees receive commensurate bonuses as our SMART union on the implementation of mutually agreed upon short and long-term strategies that will enhance the safety of our system and provide additional de-escalation training to current employees, which will begin shortly, and new employees as their new employee orientation and training begins. Next slide. We continue to track and measure our performance through the CATS Tracks Performance Scorecard. This scorecard is based upon 4 management principles: outstanding customer service, financial stewardship, employee success, and community impact. When we pair this with our Net Promoter Score and Customer Satisfaction Index, this program gives us a high-level snapshot of the performance of our services based on driving outcomes versus just managing outputs. And I'm proud that the last 3 years, CATS has received industry-leading Net Promoter Scores from our customers, beating the industry average by over 31%. Next slide. There are multiple metrics within each of the 4 strategies as listed in the slide before you. Each metric is assigned a performance goal, and we measure against that goal each quarter through statistical reporting to a third party that manages our scorecard and conducts rider and employee surveys twice annually. Recognizing the impact that the pandemic would have on several of our metrics, we adjusted our overall performance goal down from our normal level of expectation of 90 points down to 85. Our final score was a bit closer than we'd have liked in FY21 with a final score of 85.3. But as I mentioned, many of our financial metrics are specifically impacted by the pandemic. In FY21, CAT's overall customer satisfaction, as measured through our rider survey conducted in the 4th quarter of FY21, remained high. Even though our ridership fell dramatically, CAT's customers were pleased with our initial response to the pandemic and the service levels that we continue to offer. Having literally just received our 2nd quarter FY22 results depicted in the chart before you, it is clear that the pandemic continues to impact operations and particularly manpower. If you look at our on-time performance, it's dropped 9% since the 1st quarter as recruitment and retention issues continue to be an issue for bus operations. Customers with access to 15-minute or better service isn't meeting our goals as funding to implement the Envision My Ride continues to be a challenge. And an employee engagement metric with the implementation of retention bonuses and scheduling changes to allow for more 4-day, 10-hour work weeks, I believe will reverse this trend in lower scores from an employee standpoint. And then specifically from a financial side, taxpayer subsidy metric and customers per revenue hour have been impacted by the decline in fare revenue due and overall ridership declines. However, our contractor just completed our latest customer survey in the field for the first time since the pandemic began, and we are awaiting those customer satisfaction and Net Promoter Scores, which we should receive within the next couple of weeks. And we'll be happy to report back to Budget Committee and Council on the outcomes of those metrics. Next slide. CATS will be presenting a balanced budget for FY23 with no fare increase. Our budget will increase from $185.8 million in FY22 to $205.6 million in FY23. There are several major line item increases that have driven this increase, with the first full year of Gold Line Phase 2 operations commencing, and our CATS personnel service line item will increase by $8 million. Also, Phase 1 of our midlife overhaul for our Blue Line South Corridor vehicles will commence, raising our vehicle and track maintenance line items significantly. Next slide. Going a little deeper into the details of our revenue projections, our sales tax revenues continue to overperform despite the pandemic. Fare revenues continue to be impacted by ridership losses, but with the continued inflow of federal dollars, CATS has been able to shift funds from operating assistance into a more flexible non-operating revenue line item, which gains us flexibility in the use of those federal funds to maximize and leveraging those funds to meet shortfalls as a result of ridership and fare box recovery issues. Next slide. Following up on our discussion in last week's Budget Committee meeting, we've added a breakdown of the utilization of the federal COVID funds. You'll see in this graphic, $148 million is planned in our operating budget to offset lost fare box revenue due to COVID-related ridership losses, and also funding the midlife overhaul, as I mentioned earlier, of 20 Blue Line South Corridor trains that began revenue service in 2008 and will be meeting its 15-year midlife overhaul in the coming years. And then 40 million of those COVID funds will be set aside for capital projects, one-time uses, mainly providing match for our Blue Line extension savings funds, as you may remember in 2018, when we opened the Blue Line extension, that project came in well over $60 million under budget. We were successful in petitioning the Federal Transit Administration to reward our good stewardship of the financial funds to allow us to keep those federal funds to reinvest in our system. And this funding level will enable us to match those federal funds with COVID funds to allow us to move these projects forward. Next slide. Taking a brief quick look at our capital program for the next 5 years, CATS continues to focus on a state of good repair, replacing an aging bus fleet, continuing our conversion to battery electric buses, and facilities improvements to support this transition to more sustainable technology. Continued investment in security upgrades in our facilities and our fleets, and construction of our Handbright Park and Ride in Huntersville to support additional express services in North Mecklenburg. Mayor, that will conclude my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions from council members at this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lewis, and thank you very much for sitting in. And Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. I have two questions. The first one is about the electric vehicles, the electric buses. When we've been having these conversations all along, you've really been talking about, or we've been talking about the big buses, correct? The standard size buses. But is there discussion at all? Do you have discussion around perhaps on some of the routes that have less ridership, even in normal times, perhaps using a smaller electric bus? Because that, I think, you know, for me, that's always been the huge debate, is electric buses are so much more expensive, which we understand. We want to move to all electric, but we also want to be able to increase our number of buses in our fleet and improve service and on and on. So that's really comes down to a trade-off if you've decided you're going to pay for an electric bus. So along those lines, is there a thought that perhaps buying smaller electric buses would make sense for some of your routes that have less ridership?
Sure. We are looking at the current CATS fleet is made up of 40-foot general transit service buses and 30-foot buses. Now, we only have a handful of those 30-foot vehicles, and they are mainly concentrated in our northern towns, providing our circulator service for Huntersville, Davidson, Cornelius, et cetera, where a larger 40-foot bus really doesn't fit into the environment that they're operating in, nor is there the level of ridership that we typically see within Center City of Charlotte. And so we are replacing both our 30 and 40-foot buses with the battery electric buses that we are piloting right now. I think your question goes even beyond that level of fleet. are there areas where we can look to new technologies that will enhance our ability to provide more effective and efficient transit service? We've embarked down that road with 2 pilots, both in the University City area and in the North End Smart District with our partnership with Lyft. And we'll continue to evaluate opportunities to utilize the latest in technology. We're working right now in the town of Davidson on a potential automated vehicle pilot, autonomous vehicle, excuse me. And so as the technology continues to shift and become more futuristic, we'll evaluate those. But right now, in terms of the biggest bang for our buck that we can get in the conversion of our fleet is with the over 300 regular transit vehicles that we have. But we will continue to look for opportunities to diversify our fleet, not only from a sustainability standpoint, but from a service offering. I will also say that we'll have to take a look at different types of transit services, transit vehicles that may be able to meet those needs and make sure that those vehicles meet the level of FTA operating requirements that our big buses do. So this is a very fast-moving environment that we're in, and we're going to stay flexible on that.
Okay, and I think, and we talked about this in TAP a little bit, and you touched on the partnership with Lyft. I had mentioned that some cities are working to develop sort of the rideshare type programs on their own, but wasn't our relationship with Lyft just really for first mile, last mile, connecting to the light rail? So is there any other potential partnership that we could have with them to perhaps service, areas that have so little ridership that we're, sending a big bus down a route for and very few people are riding it?
So we are looking at any opportunity we can. Again, the efficiency of our system certainly is a high priority for us. That is why we're working now, as I mentioned earlier, in Davidson on an autonomous vehicle shuttle that can perhaps meet the same kind of goals that you have described. And so from autonomous vehicles to TNCs and anywhere within that gamut, we're open to exploring different methods of providing mobility options to people in our region.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question is about the Gold Line. There was a lot of community conversation about delays in the Gold Line service once it was up and running. Can you speak a little bit to how you've addressed that issue?
Sure. Initially, when the Gold Line opened up, we were experiencing some significant staffing shortages, and we had a challenge with one of the vehicles that we had in service. And so at that time, we only have 5 Gold Line vehicles. One going down is a major loss to us. We are working to add another spare vehicle to that fleet. That'll take a little time to do, but for the last 3 months, we have had all of our vehicles in service, and we are pretty much fully staffed from a service standpoint. And we have consistently had, for the last several months, all of our trains in service each and every day. So I think we've gotten over that initial hump that we saw with the first month or 2 of service, and we're providing today much more consistent levels of service on the Gold Line.
Okay, and what's the current headway between stops on the Gold Line?
We have 20-minute service on the Gold Line. That changes during different periods of the day. It goes to 30 minutes on late nights and weekends, but during the vast majority, Monday through Friday, it's 20-minute service, which requires 4 vehicles on that route.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Mr. Driggs?
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Lewis, on slide 8, you indicate that you expect federal funds of 37, or I guess, let's say 54 million in this fiscal year, and that decreases in your projection to 2026 to 10 million. So that's a drop-off in total of about 40-something million dollars. How do we replace that, or how do you anticipate we're going to be able to sustain operations without the benefit of that support when it runs off?
Sure. Great question. You will see that as I mentioned earlier, the majority of that funding in the operating is not about putting service on the street. That is about our midlife overhaul of our 20 initial South Corridor trains. Since that is a maintenance of our current fleet, we can't consider that as a capital expenditure, so it shows up in our operating line item. These funding levels are all about maintaining those trains. It's not about the service levels that you would initially think there was.
So they are non-recurring, and therefore, if that particular source of money goes away, then we're not going to be left strapped to deliver service.
Exactly, sir. Some of this, particularly in FY21 and 22, we're replacing fare box revenue, but as ridership continues to grow, we believe that portion will balance out, and the midlife overhaul is a one-time expenditure on these vehicles.
Right, and then the other thing is on the next slide, your preliminary capital program. So these are things that you intend to do and can do within the framework of the existing sales tax and so on. We are in discussions about a TMN, which would be a big event. So does this change if we get that sales tax, the new sales tax approved, and the TMN goes towards implementation?
Yes, it will change significantly over the next, once the implementation of the TMN or whatever new revenue source that is identified, we will go into certainly acquiring additional vehicles from a bus standpoint. We will ramp up our engineering and design efforts for the Blue Line extension to Ballantyne, the Red Line, and continued efforts on the Silver Line. So right now, our capital program that you see before you is financially constrained based upon the funds available in the current half-cent sales tax. If another revenue source is identified, we will adjust our capital program accordingly.
Thank you.
All right. Mr. Eggleston?
Thank you, Mayor. The Mayor Pro Tem beat me to the punch on some Gold Line questions, as well as the fact that there's been some fairly extensive reporting to her point about underutilized routes, and I do hope that we're looking for alternatives to those, because some of those are not routes that are simply waiting on uptown office workers, for instance, to come back into the office. Clearly, some of the ones that run into uptown, we will expect a pretty significant uptick, but in ones that have demonstrated low usage, there's probably a more economical way to service those customers. I guess mine is more, with those specific questions having already been addressed, I think mine is just more of a general, and maybe more to the manager, that I hope we will, as best we're able in this enterprise fund, be aggressive with our bus system in particular, but with all of the transit systems that we have operating currently, Blue Line, Gold Line, bus, and everything else. Because I think Mr. Driggs just brought up the Transformational Mobility Network and the impact that could have to the services that we're able to provide the folks in our community and surrounding. I think now is as important a time as has ever existed for the city of Charlotte to be aggressive in making sure that we are attracting and retaining the best talent in terms of our employment, our employees at CATS, that we're providing the absolute best level of service. And I understand the reality of a lot of the challenges that Mr. Lewis has outlined, and how difficult a position that puts cats in and the city in to be able to do these things as well as we'd like to be able to do them. But if we're going to ask people in our community at some point, whether that's 2023, 2024, whenever it is, to entrust us with additional dollars of theirs, of taxpayer dollars, to implement this sort of a system, I think now is a time we can't do anything halfway. And I know that we're doing the best that we can, but I think if there's more money, Mr. Manager, that we can figure out how to free up to put towards, shortening the headways, attracting more employees, retaining more employees, whatever it is, we've got to demonstrate to people now that we're putting the dollars we have currently to good use, and that we would thereby could be trusted to put the dollars we would get from a new tax to good use. So I hope we'll do everything we can, not just to have, with some of the nice to haves. And again, I'm very supportive of us moving towards newer fleet and a cleaner fleet and all of that. But at the end of the day, the person who's using our services to get to and from work those things are nice to haves. The frequency and the reliability and the safety, those are have to have. So, Mr. Manager, I hope we will push in every way that we can towards those goals as we ask voters to give us more dollars to work with for these things.
Understood.
All right, Ms. Johnson?
Yes, Mayor, thank you. I wanted to thank Mr. Lewis for the presentation and to just ask a couple questions. You mentioned more bang for the buck, and I wanted to know if we are leveraging all of the jobs in District 4. We know that the University City is the second largest jobs area in the city, and we also have Centene, and we have the large employees, and then we have the benefit of the Blue Line. So I'm wondering if a last mile solution or express bus is a priority. I heard you mention a pilot with Lyft. I'd like to hear more about that. But I'm just wondering if express buses or something, if there's something that we can do sooner than later to get folks from the Blue Line to the research area and this area where we have so many jobs. That seems like a low-hanging fruit and a solution, a resolution that would be easy to solve. So can you speak to that for me, please?
Sure. Thank you. And great question, Councilwoman Johnson. We have been working with the team at Centene and the group at Research Park for the last couple of years on trying to find ways to provide that first and last mile connection from our Blue Line service, which was, as I understand it, very key to location that they chose. It was proximity to the Blue Line. And so we've been in discussions with that group and with Research Triangle on trying to find many different solutions to help address that first and last mile connection, anticipating the hundreds, if not thousands, of jobs that could be eventually be located there. We have tried express bus service in the past along that corridor, and I will just say that considering the design of the park and where the parking lots are located, it has not been a very successful venture from a CAT standpoint. It, quite frankly, just takes a long time to get from the Blue Line, from University City, into the Research Park, transverse the park itself. It is not a very quick service. I will say that we are all very excited about the opportunity that the new CDOT bridge that will connect the University City area directly over 85 into the Research Park area will provide us with a much more direct route into the Research Park. And we've had conversations with them about autonomous vehicles, other types of shuttles that could also make that trip. So we're looking at solutions, creative solutions in the long term, looking ahead to when that investment will be fully available, but also, as I mentioned, with the Lyft partnership, trying to provide some quick and effective on-demand service to employees that are using our Blue Line service and need to get that last mile. The Lyft service, our partnership with Lyft, allows a catch rider to use the mobile app to contact a Lyft on-demand car that will meet them at the station and take them to their destination.
How is that different from a user just contacting Lyft on their own?
Because we treat it within the parameters of our service. And we pretty much just draw about a mile circular zone. Any trip that begins or ends within that zone, CATS pays a portion of that trip. And so it's a subsidized trip, as if they were transferring to another CATS bus to finish their route. A transfer from train to bus is a free transfer, and so we can't pay all of the costs within the zone, but we do provide some level of subsidy.
Okay. And these solutions, they sound great. You know, when you talk about the bridge and the autonomous vehicles, they sound very expensive and long-term solutions. So I just wonder, is there a less expensive option, such as a shuttle or something, or a subsidized shuttle that can take individuals from the train to the research park? So a less expensive and more immediate solution that we could pilot.
Sure, and you know, providing another bus route that would connect the Blue Line to the research park is something we have done in the past. As I mentioned, it was not very successful from a ridership standpoint because of the congestion of the corridor and the amount of time that it takes a vehicle to work its way through all of the parking lots. We can certainly be open to trying that once again. I just feel like we've got to find more direct and more on-demand type of service for that than going back to the old model of doing shuttle service, which just hasn't worked in the past.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Hajmira?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Lewis, thank you for this presentation. This is my second time. We heard some of this at our budget committee meeting. So I have follow-up questions. I had asked about our COVID dollars that CATS had directly received. I had requested a detailed report on how those funds are being used or have been used. Could you please send us that as part of our budget Q&A?
Sure, absolutely.
So certainly there are concerns that's been raised multiple times by our colleagues around reliability and efficiency, and some of these concerns have also been raised by our residents. What are the things in this budget that you can highlight, not just the capital, but really in the short term to address those concerns around reliability and efficiency?
Well, from a reliability standpoint, the challenge that we've had, quite frankly, is labor related. As I mentioned at the Budget Committee, there have been, in the past, prior to the pandemic, CATS averaged generally about 30 to 40 unplanned absences from our bus service on a daily basis. We have a what we entitle a spare operator, extra operating board of operators that we have over and above the number that it takes to put out daily service. That operating board allows us to continue service when we have unforeseen circumstances, cover vacations, cover sick, and any other last-minute absence that typically occurs. As I mentioned, pre-pandemic, that averaged about 30 to 40 a day. Over the last year, there have been times when that number has reached 100 to 125. And so we have had to get very flexible in how we provide our service in order to continue providing a level of transit service levels to make sure that we focus on our most heavily utilized routes and continue to make sure that we provide service to those areas that desperately need it. We continue to work with our employees, our employee groups from a city standpoint. We've heard some of their concerns about flexibility in their work schedule. As I mentioned earlier, we're moving towards more 4-day work weeks to help provide additional flexibility, 4 10-hour days rather than the typical 5 8-hour days. The retention and recruitment bonuses that we have identified, I think, are helping. We are seeing those numbers drop, as I mentioned, from 125 to, still a high number, but for the last month or so, it's been in the 80 to 90 range. And so this is going to be an ongoing conversation with our employees, a lot of trial and error. We're listening to their suggestions and working to implement different pilots that will help address their concerns. I think this is greater than just paying more money to our employees, although that always helps. I think in this environment where so many of our friends and family members and neighbors are working in a virtual environment, and then some are our hourly employees who their work environment didn't change during the pandemic, has not changed and will not. And so what can we do to support them from not just a health standpoint and a financial standpoint, but how can we make the work environment different for them? And so the number one thing we heard from employees was 4-day work weeks. So we're implementing that. And we'll continue the conversation with employees and do whatever we can to address these concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis.
I have a few questions, Madam Mayor. Mr. Lewis, thank you so much for really giving me or giving us a detailed response here. Certainly, this labor shortage is nationwide, and I recognize that from 30 to 40 to going to 100 and 125 vacancies or 100 to 125 absences in a day certainly leaves creates issues around reliability and efficiency. But in the transit system, we just don't have that level of capacity for trial and error. When we have residents that rely on our public transit to get to work, to get to school, or to get to their grocery store or drugstore or doctor's appointments. And I know Mr. Eggleston mentioned this earlier, that whatever we can do now to address these concerns before we go ask for more money will help us build trust. And I think that's, we currently have a lack of trust in our public transit system because some of these concerns that you have also mentioned. Flexibility, hoping that it will get us to where we need to go to address the liability concerns. And I understand that you have also provided one-time incentives, a sort of retention bonus. And I'm hoping that will also address some of this. But the gap is just too high. And I'd like to see if there are other tools that we have in our toolbox to address some of these concerns. I know that our council meeting, during our public forum, some of our bus operators have continued to advocate for pay rate increase. And I'm curious, and I know this is something as a region we have to figure out, and it's not just Charlotte's responsibility, but what is MTA's plan to address this concerns around reliability and efficiency, and what is the kind of feedback and the support you have received from our region, and what else you would like us to do to address this sooner rather than later?
So, Councilmember Ajmer, I'm not quite sure. I want to make sure I understand your question. From a regional standpoint, you're referring to the MTC. That's our board.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm keep saying it.
And we are working this budget. We continue to work with the MTC. We have heard about service reliability issues from our partners throughout Mecklenburg County. We understand that this is a very complicated issue, and it's not just alone to Charlotte. This is an industry-wide. Transit systems across the nation are facing similar types of things. One thing I think we can remain proud of is many systems across the nation cut service significantly. Now, we can talk about chicken and an egg. You know, should we cut back service levels to a level where I can meet with the current manpower we have, or do we focus on growing the manpower to get in on, to be here on a regularly available basis to meet the expectations that the community has? And so I think, and with my board, that we are banking on talking with our employees, hearing what they have asked for that will make their work environment more inviting in this pandemic type of situation, and implementing that. As I mentioned, the 4-day work weeks was the number one issue that we've heard from. From a safety and security standpoint, we've heard about the enhancements to security, and we are funding in this additional roving security patrols for our bus routes. That is in this budget. And so communicating with our employees, hearing from them and implementing the ideas that we are coming up with in partnership, I think is the way to move forward, and not just throwing our hands up and cutting service as so many other agencies are doing around the nation.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis.
I believe I have Mr. Newton or Mr. Winston. Ms. Jackson, is it Mr. Winston or Mr. Newton?
It's both of them, but Mr. Winston's next.
Mr. Winston, followed by Mr. Newton.
Yeah. Thank you. I have two questions, Mr. Lewis. One is pretty direct. Are there any increases or changes or new ideas when it comes to van or motor pool for the upcoming fiscal year? And if so, what are they? And also to kind of piggyback on what my colleagues were saying, particularly Mr. Ajmer, Mr. Eggleston, and Mayor Pro Tem, a lot of what our constituents, and I think what we are on council are usually concerned with, is reliability and frequency of trips, whether that be Blue Line, Gold Line, bus, present and future kind of considerations when it comes to that. But I think one of the things that I've really paid attention to and understood a little better in the conversations that we've been having this year in particular is that obviously there's a lot that goes into frequency and dependability. It is the ability to hire and keep people healthy to work. It is the capital expenses, or so many different externalities. But while the conversations might need to go down those various paths, in the end, most of the times, council members want to know, how much do we need to spend, or what are the budgetary implications of maintaining specific dependability rates and frequency rates, notwithstanding all of those externalities that go into it. So I'm wondering if, in kind of, I'm trying to make sure that we are all able to have conversations in an efficient manner, and do it in a way that is really translatable to our constituents, who have the questions and demands. Is there a way that we can really connect council's priorities around frequencies, and lead times to the budget? For instance, okay, if we want to make sure that there are 15-minute times between the Blue Line and most bus routes, and every 5 to 7 minutes on special events, that this is going to cost a certain amount each year to achieve those kind of outcomes. And I don't think we necessarily talk about it like that, because we get so caught up in those, all those specific externalities. Is there a way that we can change the way we're talking to each other, so city council, we can be more efficient and effective? I guess this kind of question is exemplary of, those inefficiencies. But does that make sense?
If I understand your question, I think there are two questions. Number one, your first question was in regard to, once again, finding other providers or other means of providing mobility services to areas that have smaller demand, lower demand for service. We've talked about using TNCs in our partnership with Lyft. I've talked about the autonomous vehicle pilot that we're working on with Davidson College and the city of Davidson. We also have a van pool service, but the van pool is really about employer to employee service. So large employers like the airport, people may have 5 or 6 people who live in a community and they all work at the airport. And so we provide the vehicle and they provide the transportation. That group gets together and decides when they want to leave in the morning and when they want to come back. And one of the members of the group drives the vehicle. CATS provides the vehicle, takes care of the maintenance and insurance and the fuel. And so we will continue to market and do additional outreach, but that has kind of slowed down during the pandemic since so many people have been working virtually, and we recognize that as we transition into whatever new normalcy will be, we have to look differently at that program. Your question about how we talk, I think we have about the issue of reliability and frequency. I think I divide that into a two-part question. Number one is the immediacy of the reliability of our current levels of service. Councilmember Ajmira brought up and eloquently laid out concerns that she had, and that many of you are hearing from constituents. We are working on that immediate issue. But we also have to recognize that before 2020, before there was a pandemic, we still had frequency issues. 22 of our 66 routes had headways of greater than 45 minutes. And almost half of those were 60 minutes or greater. That is still the problem. That is still the issue. And as you mentioned, there are some externalities that are the reality of that. We will need to hire more operators, hire more mechanics, and buy more buses in order to change that. How we talk about that and debate and find sources, I think, we we can have. I'm happy to meet with individual council members or if this is an issue for a particular committee. But the Envision My Ride program we laid out in 2018, it hasn't changed since then. We have tried to fund what we can with current funding levels. And the manager has provided some extra funds over the last couple of years to try and chip away at that. But this is it's a big apple to bite. It's over $150 million in capital and upwards of $60 million of additional operating if we're going to meet that standard.
Well, and to that point, so let me try to approach it from this way. So let's say the bus lead time between routes is 20 minutes, and it's City Council's desire to get that down to 15 minutes. We know that there are many different issues that go into it. It's not just about buying buses, like you said. It could be about hiring folks or whatever. But if it is council's desire to get those routes down to 15 minutes, to cut it from 20 to 15 minutes, I don't think we ever talk about it strictly, okay, to do that, given everything, it's going to cost this much money, this much additional money to achieve those outcomes that City Council wants to have. Is there a way to kind of talk about it like that, in that big picture, efficient kind of way, and then be able to kind of get into the weeds of breaking it down? Well, this percentage of that cost is going to be to hire more bus drivers. This percentage is going to be to buy more buses, for example. I don't think we have that kind of macro kind of conversation right now, and sometimes that could get confusing. So I guess are we able to have it on that kind of eye level?
Councilmember Winston, if you're asking me that question, I think we absolutely are. And I'm happy to have that discussion at councils, whether it be individual or at the committee level or as the entire council at your convenience. Thank you.
Mr. Phipps?
I
I'm
lowered
sorry,
my
I said
hand.
Mr. Newton before, but Ms. Jackson told me it was Mr. Phipps, so, Mr. Phipps.
No, I had lowered my hand.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Phipps. I have one request, Mr. Lewis, and it's not for right now, but I'd like to hear a little bit more about the special service fleet and the maintenance and repairs and replacement schedule for that fleet. I hear a number of comments about the ride, and I hear great comments about the people that work on the special services buses. So I want the people to know how much they're appreciated, but I also hear a lot about the driver, the comfort of that ride, especially for those that are ADA. All right, so I'd just like to get some information on that. Okay, with that, we'll go to our next item, which is aviation, and then following aviation, we're going to go quickly through the financial partners. Okay, who's up? Ms. Gentry is coming up, I believe.
Madam Mayor,
Yes?
Ms. Johnson has another question.
We can do that one after the aviation presentation, if that's okay. We'll come back to Ms. Johnson. Ms. Gentry?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Madam Mayor.
I think you're still on red. Somebody's got it. There you go.
Sorry. Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, Mr. Manager, and City Council. My name is Haley Gentry, and I'm the Aviation Director. And I have with me Mike Hill, the Airport CFO, as well as Eric Hirschberger, who is our Airport Finance Director. We're happy to be with you, and we're going to jump right into our presentation this afternoon. Excuse me. This is a slide that many of you have seen before. I would like to take a few minutes to highlight a couple of items on this, particularly our passenger numbers ending in 2021. As you're aware, COVID was detrimental to the aviation industry. Prior to COVID, we were averaging 50 million passengers a year. 2019, we came in at 50 million. 2020, we were at 27 million, and then in 2021, we have now reached 43 billion. So I wanted to share those numbers with you to show you that we are on our way to recovery in a very strong way. Also would like to point out to you the $24 billion in economic impact. That is for the airport alone, which is 4% of the state's gross domestic product. That's just really unprecedented. Airports in North Carolina alone make up 10% of the local economy, so we are really proud of that number. I think it's possibly even more now. That number is several years outdated. Also a reminder while we're in this slide that we are American Airlines' second largest hub. And as a result of the strength of the hub during the pandemic years, last year we were the 6th busiest airport in the country. Okay, these are our strategic principles. There are 6 of them: safety and security, strategic growth, strong partnerships, asset preservation, value employees, and customer focus. These are the business platforms that our business operates from on a daily basis. Each of these have their own statements. They've been condensed for this purpose, and you'll see that you've got certain focus areas and targets. The targets that are in the bottom in the italics print are really focused on our budget for this year, and those are our priorities as we move forward. We have used these strategic principles, which I would be remiss if I did not recognize Mr. Cagle, who was instrumental in helping us adopt these, but when he was director. But if we shouldn't be doing things that don't fall within these 6 principles, and this is kind of our litmus test of priorities as we move forward in the budget. Where does it fall in our strategic principles, and how are we applying these to every aspect of our business? So we'll jump right into the meat of our budget, and I love to start with good news. So we started with revenues first. Revenues are at a record high for the airport. And there are a couple of things that are driving that. You'll see that there's as much as I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong slide here. As much as a increase of 27% for our budget in terms of revenues. And you will also see that we have a 16% increase to the overall budget. So you've got revenues at 27% and budget at 16%. So what's driving that? If you look at revenues, the pandemic has really changed the way we work, as many of you are experiencing yourself in your daily work life. And we have people who are now not chained to a desk, and they can work from wherever. They can work remotely, and they are taking their work and including pleasure trips with that. So we have increased stay in our parking operation. The average stay has increased. And we have a new parking revenue control system, which was also implemented. That system allows you to book your parking online in advance, and it allows you to know where you're going to park. We are far ahead of our expectations for where we were projected to be with that project. Having said that, we are extremely up in our parking activity, and we are also up in our avgas and jet fuel sales. If you don't recall, we are a fuel reseller, and that is in our corporate aviation area. And as corporations have been slow to put their employees as air carrier passengers, they have not been slow to put them on their own airplanes and fly them where they need to be. So that has really driven up our revenue. And last year, we were at about $4.4 million in fuel sales. This year, we're estimating to be at about $5.6 million. So that just shows you the growth. This budget assumes about a $4 a gallon price for that fuel. It is possible that could change depending on circumstances, but we feel pretty good. The highest it's peaked so far has been about $4.25. So that gives you some framework for that information. In terms of the overall budget increase, what you're really looking at is a restoration of services to pre-pandemic. We are getting our staffing where it needs to be. We put many things on hold, just stopped in the middle of it. And we are also seeing increased landed weights and increased passenger fees that are associated with the air carrier activities in Charlotte. I will remind you that this budget is reflective of our CARES, CARISA, and ARPA funds. We did receive about $345 million in federal stimulus funds. And this budget also shows charge-outs. If you're wondering what a charge-out is, that's with regard to a capital project. So don't let that throw you off. We were supplemented by federal funds that year and did not use them. Next. So this is a slide some of you may have seen if you were in the committee meeting, but I think a picture is worth 1,000 words. If you look at the red line, that is the average of U.S. airports in domestic passenger levels in a recovery scenario. If you look at the blue or teal line, that's Charlotte. So if you look at September of 2021, we were at 112% of what was occurring in 2019 throughout the country. So I think it just shows you the strength of the hub here in Charlotte. American made it very well known they were going to double down on Charlotte and DFW during the pandemic, and that is quite evident as you look at this. Again, our strategic principles shows you where the money is going. I talked about the fuel. You can look under strong partnerships, and that's driving that $8.4 million. Also would point out 5.9 to keep up with our public safety functions that are in the terminal building. That's police and fire that provide service, and our contract with Medic that provides medical response to all of our passengers and employees on site. They are embedded in our terminal building for quick response and a really important part of what we do. Also would point out there's $2.3 million in there for our employees for training, workforce development, and any recruitment and retention incentives that may come out of this year's budget. So after we had our presentation in the committee, there was a few questions about our capital program. So we did add this slide in response to that. And as you very well know, if you've been to the airport, we have a tremendous passenger terminal expansion underway right now. And there's a photograph of what we're looking to be in the next 3 years. We're about halfway through that project. You see the exterior of the front of the terminal, and then you see the interior. Keep in mind that adds about 90 feet to the front of the terminal and about 800,000 square feet of passenger space. So if you look at the chart, though, what you start to see is a lot of purple, and that is this chart is meant to show you that as we move from the conclusion of this project, we are really going to wind up investing most of our capital dollars in the airfield. I think some of you were here and you were able to hear Robert Isom, the incoming CEO, incoming CEO for American, speak about what it takes to operate an airport. And he highlighted 3 things, and he talked about airspace, facilities, and then your airfield. So I think this is a very affirming slide that we're all in lockstep. As you will see in 2024, 25, 26, 27, the majority of our capital funds are programmed for the airfield. That does include a new runway and associated projects with that runway, such as a new fire station, end-around runways that help us with safety, de-icing pads, things of that nature that will all be enabling projects to the forthcoming runway. And then, of course, one of our favorite slides that you've seen before, and Mr. Driggs specifically asked us to share this, really good news slide. This is our cost per enplaned passenger. And this is a very important slide to the airlines, but again, I think really speaks to the financial conservancy and mindset of our organization. If you look to the right, you see Charlotte. And then if you look to the left, you see JFK. Now, there's a little bit of a faux pas on this slide, but I think that it actually is more telling the way it's done. Our scale on the left stops at $20. And if you look at, I believe that's Detroit, or excuse me, Boston, it starts to go off the page. LaGuardia and JFK are almost at the $50 mark.
So even though we've got a little mistake in our slide here, I think it's still very illustrative of what's occurring in real time. I would also point out that the gray columns on here are the American Airlines hubs, and I think that gives you a good idea of how we stack up to those hubs. We did in the fiscal year or we're anticipating in the fiscal year at $1.64. It will remain under $2 as we move forward into next fiscal year. Those are all the slides that I have. I'd be happy to take any questions. We have two people, Mayor Pro Tem followed by Mr. Driggs.
Thank you, Haley. Great work, and it's fun to be at the airport and see how the project's coming along. It's really starting to take shape nicely, and you can really envision what it's going to look like. I wondered about the ability to, I remember when the new American Airlines chair talked about how he would actually love to increase service there, but there's a capacity issue. I also wonder about service within the airport and how you've been able to keep up with that, as passengers, air travel increases, how you're able to keep up with that with regards to baggage handlers in that area, because I've felt like that's slowed down, actually.
Well, the airport has certainly not been immune to what's happening with the HR challenges in our community. I will tell you that we have all come together, and when I say all, airlines, rental cars, restaurants, small business owners, aviation department, we have all come together to work on this collectively as a project. I don't doubt that you have felt like it was slower because we've all had challenges, including the airline. We have a job fair at the end of the month at Bojangles Arena on the 30th, where another example of us collectively working on this. I can tell you that from a concessionaire's viewpoint, they have had to shorten the hours of their day. So like, let's say normally a day would be from 6:30 in the morning to 9:30 at night. They may not have service, or operating hours rather, except from like 7:30 to 7:30 at night. And trying to stretch the bulk of the day as they can. 99% of our concessions are open. But the employment situation is very real. We are experiencing it in the aviation department as well. We've actually hired additional recruiters to help us right now, and we're trying some new tactics to do everything we can to bring people in. But it has become something that has brought, I think, all of the airport tenants together to work a little bit harder and in different ways.
So, and we did hear a lot about the concessionaires when we went through our small business program with our CARES Act money. But I'm wondering, with regards to baggage handlers, for example, are they, I know the vast majority of the people out there don't work directly for the airport. They work for contractors. So is this an issue that you can't increase their pay to get more people there? Is it a collective bargaining issue? Is it a union issue? What is it, given that there does seem to be a healthier margin at the airport now? Can some of that be put towards salaries to try to get folks back into those jobs?
Well, the majority of the people you're mentioning do work directly for the airlines or an airline subcontractor, so that would not have anything to do with our budget. However, I will point out to you that when we are doing well, we do have a revenue share with the airlines, so they are also doing well in terms of their operation in Charlotte. It is a daily problem that we deal with. The majority of the airline employees in that position are unionized, and I know that the airlines are paying incentives, and we have been doing that with certain identified jobs as well.
Okay, but baggage handlers aren't the airline, are they?
They are the airline, or they are a subcontractor to the airline. They are not the aviation department.
I thought they told me they were not. Okay.
Well, they do contract for many of those. So there are 3 contractors that I know of that work for various airlines on the airfield.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to add, I had the opportunity to talk with some of the team out there, and they told me that they had gotten incentives for free parking and they had gotten bus passes and things like that that the employers are doing, and their wages were up from what we have ordinarily seen in the chamber to they were very complimentary of the efforts that we had with the CARES money and very complimentary with the structure from the airport. So I think that, of course, there's always other things to do, but the idea of being able to reduce the expense of working at the airport was of real value to them, as much of a value as an increase in the wage. So some of those things made a big difference as well.
The federal funds that were designated for concessionaires have really allowed the concessionaires to do some different things. And our master concessionaires have, between the two of them, have invested over $2 million in wages in Charlotte alone for their employees. So you're exactly right. It's made a tremendous difference.
So we'll go to Mr. Driggs, followed by Ms. Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. I think it's worth emphasizing the airport is a crown jewel for Charlotte. It is a major driver of many of our successes, and it has been well-run for some time, so congratulations to you, but also Mr. Cagle. I think you did a lot to get us started in a good direction, and it's growing. It's really going well. I want to particularly acknowledge, though, a big driver of that success has been our relationship with American Airlines. And I think it's a good idea to acknowledge that and express our appreciation for the relationship we have with American. I met the CEO, the new CEO, Mr. Isom, recently, and thoroughly enjoyed talking with him and feel very good about the outlook for the airline and for our relationship with them. I do think it's worth mentioning, because this subject does come up about our cost per plane passenger and compensation at the airport. We really need to be very clear that the terms of that compensation are negotiated in collective bargaining agreements and through other arrangements with people other than us. So if those parties, for example, agreed to an increase in compensation for their employees, they would charge us accordingly. They would pass those costs on. But our responsibility is to get the best possible terms we can for the airport. And so we can't involve ourselves in what are often national labor negotiations for some of these service providers. And I have also had a conversation with the manager about, in our overall budget process, what the kind of outlook is for compensation or how we're going to deal with the current inflationary environment. And I think that will include the enterprise funds. We still have work to do on that. But to the extent that there are aviation employees at the airport, they will be included in our discussions about how we compensate in the current inflationary environment. But again, just wanted to thank you and say congratulations. I don't have questions as such. When is that runway going to get closed, just out of interest? I've forgotten that.
The runway 523, we don't anticipate that closing until 2 years. Probably,
right,
but we'll
right.
be working toward that closure. You'll start to see some enabling projects. We're not actively using it for runway activity right now. We're using it as a taxiway to help us with capacity, but that will change in the next 2 years.
At least we now have a tower from which you can see it.
Yes,
right?
That is true.
And what is the kind of time horizon for the completion of all of this activity at the terminals, the runways? I mean, how many years do you think?
I was going to say never. Never.
We have a list of projects now. I mean, you're right.
Well, this summer, we will open a portion of the ticketing lobby expansion. And then that project, we're at about the 2.5-year mark. It is a 5-year project. And we will start the runway. And we anticipate the runway being open at 2027, 26. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We want you to continue a project all the time. So.
Yeah, we have a problem if we don't have an active project.
Ms. Johnson?
Thank you, Mayor. My question was for John Lewis regarding services for disability, but I'll just reach out to him directly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Phipps?
Yeah, with all the construction and with projects going on out at the airport, did I understand you to say that as far as capacity standpoint, to, get more domestic or even more international flights, is that something that's going to occur or not?
Well, we are working to add capacity in our terminal space. Concourse A, Phase 2, it is a sister concourse to the concourse that opened, gosh, I think that was 2018 now. And it will add 10 gates to our facility. That will enable us to move some airlines around, and that will give us additional capacity for the airlines to expand. I can tell you we've been working very closely with the airlines to actually restore all pre-pandemic service levels. We anticipate ending this year at 100%, but we have not fully restored all of those services. For example, international. This summer, you're starting to see some transatlantic service come back, but that's been a big missing piece of the puzzle. So I think you're going to start to see a little consolidation in the industry. If you've been following the news, you're seeing Spirit, Frontier, JetBlue, they're all in discussions for coming together in one way or another. And I think all of those things contribute to additional service. But the airlines would make the decision about the additional service, I think, when we have additional gates that will give them more of a green light than they have now.
All right. Thank you, Ms.
So we are optimistic then that there will be some expansion both domestically and internationally going forward as these enhancements to the airport progress.
We are absolutely optimistic that there will be continued growth at the airport.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Phipps. I think that's all of our speakers on aviation, so Mr. Berkman, what is next?
So our final presentation is around financial partners. So we'll have Marie Harris, Deputy Strategy and Budget Director, come up. We did send out the financial partners packet 2 weeks ago to City Council. Nothing on the slide is anything new that wasn't in the packet, just a summary in front of you. So I'll also remind Council that we typically do this financial partners process. It is not a staff recommendation at this point, like everything else that comes out in the proposed budget. But whether it's today or contacting Marie or myself after the fact, we're always happy to answer any questions.
All right, Ms. Harris.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Again, I don't want to take up too much of your time, only an hour or so. But as Ryan stated, we have all the details, together in your packet. So this is just really a refresher overview for you. And again, as Ryan mentioned, this is just a portion of all your partners across the city, but this is specifically today around these that roll into these three buckets within the budget development process. The general fund and PAYGO discretionary, and those are the ones that you have the most flexibility with, dedicated revenue resources, and the housing financial partners. And so this slide just is a overview of what's in your packet. Basically, for last year, we funded about 1.4 million, and then there was one partner that did not reapply, but that was on purpose. It was a one-time partnership we had with UNCC, building data collaboration and pulling data together. But beyond that, all of our financial partners did reapply, and of those, some of them increased their requests for a total, and these two green ones are going to be detailed on the next slides. Increased request of approximately 115,000, and then about $1 million for new partner requests. So within your packet, it totals 2.277 million total. And again, this is the current partners and what they're funded at for this fiscal year, what they're requesting the next fiscal year, and any increase, if applicable, that they're asking for. And there's a lot more detail on all this within your packet as well. And then we also, in addition to the 9 that are reapplying, we had 5 new partners 5 new applicants applying for partnerships. And then for our dedicated revenue sources, these are the ones that manage our MSDs, our partners that do that. And as just a reminder, we did an RFP for MSDs back in February 2021, so that's been refreshed lately. And then we also have our Charlotte Regional Visitors Authority partnerships. And then for our housing financial partners, these are all managed through Sean and Rebecca's group through housing. And we have Carolina Cares Partnership is our main partner for the federal housing opportunities with persons with AIDS grants we get. We have Crisis Assistance Ministry, who does a lot of emergency utility relief as well as rental relief. And then we also have Dream Key and the list that provide housing type services as well. And then that would be it. And I know it's a lot of information in your packet and again, you have hard copies today, or also it was in your email from March 24th, also an email from me. But if you hadn't had a chance yet to look through it, just as you have the time, just let me know of any additional information that would be helpful. And any questions beyond that?
All right. Can I just say, do we have addresses or locations on the sheets that we got from each group or agency?
No, ma'am, but we can provide
Could we
that.
provide some information about where they're located? I just didn't know if they were city, county, or beyond. And I guess what I was also thinking is, their clients, are their clients from, where are they from?
Yeah, and that information
That's
is
but-
in here, yeah, the
So
population.
the others,
they
I think,
serve,
to just
yes.
be able to locate where they are would be very helpful. Okay, let's see. Why don't we start with Mr. Eggleston?
Yeah, let's do that.
Thank you, Mayor. All of these are great organizations. I'm glad to see new people coming to the table to partner with us to meet a lot of the goals that we have as a city. And I think we could probably justify increasing the expenditure for any of them for the work they're doing. But one that comes to mind, and I'm guessing Mayor Pro Tem Isel and Councilman Ajmera in particular will probably have something similar to say, that seems to be flat most years is Trees Charlotte. And with the priority that we as a city council and many of the constituents we hear from, with the level of priority that people have put on our tree canopy, as we continue to lose it at a rapid pace, I think it would, before we would consider growing the amount that we set aside for Tree Charlotte in our budget, we'd certainly need to have the conversation with them about if they have the bandwidth to actually deploy it effectively. But I do think we ought to have that conversation, because with the money we put into all the different things we do, that seems like a pretty small allocation, and they seem to be our largest partner and maybe the most effective organization in terms of trying to help us curb that loss of tree canopy. So again, not to say that there couldn't be additional dollars for all of these things, but that's one that sticks out to me as low, and it continues to be flat with no requested increases. Maybe we should be the ones to request feedback on whether an increase might help them expand the work they're doing.
Mr. Eggleston, I had a meeting with the new executive director of Tree Charlotte, and I think that's an excellent point, because they're working hand in hand with our urban forester. And the idea that they had was that they may need to shift some of their purpose. So I think a follow-up with the Tree Charlotte executive director and our urban forester, and to talk about what they're doing would be really a good idea. Because it's not about the money, it's about where they deploy and what they're supporting. So you're right, it's the money is needed. The question is how to make sure that we get the same kind of work that they're going towards. So, Ms.
And I
Ashmore?
didn't mean to leave Mr. Phipps out. I know he needs trees for all his birds so that they can eat from his bird feeders. So.
Yeah. All right, Ms. Ashmera. Ms. Ashmera?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to give a shout out to Ryan and the entire budget team for putting together a really comprehensive Q&A package. I just really appreciate it. It did take me a while to get through all of it, but Ryan spent almost 2 hours on Monday and went through every single scenario I wanted him to build and tell me, well, this is not possible, this is possible. So I really appreciate that, and I just really appreciate the work that the budget team does. It's a lot of hard work.
Thank you, Ms. Ashmira. I'm sure they appreciate hearing that from you as well. Ms. Johnson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I wanted to ask Marie, and I'm not sure if you'll have the answer for this, but there was a proposal for organizations, for us to fund larger organizations to help nonprofit organizations build capacity. We had a presentation, I think it was to the ED committee when I was on that committee. So I want to know if that funding or that project is included in the financial partners or where we will see that in the budget.
Maria. So thank you, Councilmember Johnson. We were trying to not take up too much of your time, and I won't do it here. This came up the last time we had a discussion about the various grants that are out there, and we didn't want you to think that this is the only opportunity. So there's no less than 8 different pots of money. I'll just go very quickly. There's the CARES Act nonprofit grant. There's the ARPA nonprofit grant, which I believe is what you're talking about now, that Sean presented. He's shaking his head, yes. Last month. There's Safe Charlotte grants, there's placemaking grants, there's neighborhood matching grants, there's Jumpstart grants. So there's a lot of different opportunities for folks, some of the grassroots nonprofits that you've mentioned, to apply. And there's also this new capability for this partnership with some of the more established organizations. And I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that's the one I'm talking about, not for the grassroots, but for those 4 or 5 organizations that presented, and only one of them served nonprofits. So I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't overlooking that. Okay, and then secondly, we request outcome measurements and reports from the organizations that we fund in previous years.
Yes, ma'am. Part of the process is in advance when they apply. They tell us what they plan to do with the funds, and then we work with the procurement team, the city's procurement team and their teams to build contracts in July, and then we get mid-year reports from them. So in your packet, you'll actually see a snippet from their mid-year report. If they're a current partner, that shows what they said they would do, what they did last year, and their mid-year report. So those are included within the pages.
So do we get end-of-year reports?
I believe. Yeah. So the following year, it'll catch up, yes. So we do collect it on an annual and mid-year basis. And I'm just thinking I need to recognize Lawrence DeGaulle, who's behind me, who's been the face that works, make sure all these different requirements and working with all the partners, because some of them, need extra help in understanding our requirements. So she's been working back and forth to make sure they all had complete packets.
And then one number that jumps out to me is Crisis Assistance Ministry.
Yes, ma'am.
I know they used to assist with our housing assistance along with Dream Key. We worked with hand in hand with both of them. And I know there was a change where Crisis was only doing the utility assistance and Dream Key was providing the housing assistance.
Well, they also do some rental assistance, and we do have Rebecca Hefner.
That's what I meant, the rental assistance, yeah.
Yeah, so they do those too. And Rebecca, am I leaving out anything else they do? Okay, so that's primarily what they do. Emergency rental assistance for us and emergency utility assistance. Yes, ma'am.
I just wonder if, it just seems like a huge disparity when both organizations are so helpful to the community. That's all. I know that Crisis Assistance Ministry, I know that and Drink, he does a phenomenal job, but so does Crisis. So I was just wondering, it looks like a huge disparity for the organizations that both work so closely with the community and that we rely on so heavily. So I just wanted to know if there was if I could look at, and we can talk offline on what they requested and if this is enough. I guess that's the bottom line. Is this enough to meet the needs of the community?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Mr. Phipps?
I know we got this report a couple of weeks ago, and then we got one today in our packet. I know, I think we can assume that there were no changes in these packet numbers or presentations.
Why are you trying to call me out? So I did make one typo. Sorry, there is one correction. An Alliance on your hard copy that was mailed out, on the table of contents, I had made a typo and put 99,000 for 2022 when it's actually 90,000. It's right in the material, the meat of it, but I did type it wrong in the table of contents.
I think you're okay, Marie.
Do not let that happen again, all right?
Mr. Phipps, fundamentally, everything is the same.
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't catch that, so thank you for...
He
That's the bank
he is the
examiner.
numbers
Disclosing
guy
it.
after Mr. Driggs. He's looking for that $9,000 right now. Okay. Anything else,
Well, look,
Mr. Phipps?
Yes. I noticed in a couple of the new requests, there's some critical pieces of information that are missing. Are they going to be encouraged to supply that information before we meet again and discuss this further, or what?
They already have. We've reached out to them all several times, and they've reviewed this material before it went before you today.
Okay, so this is the final submission then from them.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Phipps. So now, Mayor Pro Tem and then Mr. Driggs.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I too had concerns about Tree Charlotte because I wonder if it's a capacity issue, do we need to do more to help them increase staff? Because to me, it almost feels like they're an important arm of our staff. They do critical work that is important to all of us. Versus some of our partners are things that we support, but they aren't really within the scope of what the charge is for Charlotte City Council. So I'd love to see, some feedback as we discussed from Tree Charlotte as to whether or not they need more staff or what it is they need to really be able to beef up their operations. And then I did have a question about agencies that are outside of the scope of what we do on council, whether it be, we've had this conversation before, whether it be youth services or, mental health, health and human services. It's all important, but at what point do we say that's within our scope and that's not within our scope for financial partner requests?
I'm sure that will be a great debate at some point in the process.
Correct. We do not put that level of scrutiny on them. However, we do make sure all of them that apply have to align how, but to your point, is it a core city service or is it supporting? So.
And do we have an ultimate limit on how much we're willing to give out in financial partner money every year, or is it just what we approve?
Well, we definitely have a tight pocketbook, but yes, it's just what you approve.
Okay.
I think, remember, in CBDG, you had a certain amount of a percentage of the total grant that you could use, and that was a cap. But I don't think that we've ever had a cap.
Yeah, that's for the housing one. Sorry, when I was talking about there's no cap, I'm sorry, I was referring specifically to the general fund ones.
I think we've expanded it considerably over the last several years. I don't know how much, but at least I see the growth in it.
Well, I mean, we've actually, because we've recategorized things like arts and culture to a different bucket, we've actually shrunk it quite a bit, because that was 3.2 million right there. So it just made me wonder, do we have a kind of a hit number that we try to stick to and everybody has to balance within that or not?
Yep. So Mayor Pro Tem, we're working on, I guess, what we call a bubble chart. And again, I did a disservice earlier today. There are a number of opportunities for people to apply for grants. And I think something may be in the packet this week or next week to explain that. And to your question, I will give you a balanced budget. And if there is something that you want to do more with the financial partners, it will just be one of those situations where how do you move money around to make
Sure,
that happen?
yeah.
Straw votes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Driggs?
So all of these applicants have been vetted, right, and have been found to meet our requirements, and therefore, it's just up to us to choose. Were there applications that are not here, that were not kind of?
No, sir, that's everybody. That's everybody that applied, and we added something new this year, to your point, just to make sure here. So we work back and forth with them to make sure, like this application status key, those are filled in and complete, and we try to, help them make sure they're filled in and complete. But beyond that, no, we do not vet them.
So as offered, what we have here on the general fund side, for example, is an increase of about 50%. Will there be a staff recommendation?
Oh, yes. It'll be included in his proposed
All
budget.
right, so you will kind of look at these and then take feedback from us and get it down. Is your goal to get it down to a similar number to the prior year?
Well, that's Ryan's goal always, is that to keep it pretty much level, but we take feedback from these meetings, and I try to make sure that that's included in what we do.
Right, because the Sword of Spirit application caught my eye just because it's almost the same as their entire budget. So I assume that if we entertain that, we're going to look hard at that number.
Absolutely.
Good. I have nothing else.
Thank you.
All right. So,
I got a question.
sorry.
I think it's Phipps.
Mr. Phipps, did you say something?
Yeah, with respect to Tree Charlotte, didn't we also enter into a separate funding allocation for them outside of this request? I thought it was several $1 million that we had agreed to fund with Tree Charlotte.
Yes, so you're correct, not on the number, Mr. Phipps, but on the concept. I'm no longer on the board, but I do believe that the concept was there is this developer pot of funds, and after we worked with legal, we were able to take a portion of that. I want to say it was $250,000 that we were able to work with Tree Charlotte if they could, I guess, plant trees on city-owned property or something like that. But we'll make sure in the write-up that we give you something that's more than my foggy memory from a couple of years ago. But yes, there was an additional pot of money outside of this to help Tree Charlotte plantings.
Okay. Mr. Bergman, anything else? All right, so I'm going to say that this meeting is of this budget cycle. Our next budget meeting is March 9th. No, when?
This is April.
This is April. Where am I? When, do we have another one? This is the last one?
First Monday in May.
First Monday in May. Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.